So, good morning, everyone. Let's get started with the first keynote today. The first keynote will be given by Axel Boschman from PQ Shield, and the title of the talk is Hardware Security and the Rise of Bloc-Cipher. I'm very curious about the block part here because this is an unusual spelling, and I'm looking forward to that. To introduce Axel, Axel is a product security and innovation head at PQ Shield. He has been in this industry for a long time. He did his PhD from Bochum, where he was studying lightweight crypto. Then he was a assistant professor at NTU Singapore, followed by industrial role in NXP Semiconductors, which later he moved to Zenith Labs, again looking into product security. And currently at PQ Shield, he's looking at various aspects of product security, and I'm sure Axel will share more about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here again. I really like the CARDIS conference. Back when I was in academia, I also published here, but I moved out of academia around 10 years ago, and as Stefan said, I was in industry. And yeah, it's interesting that my first slide is precisely on this typo here. So you mentioned this is very curious about what's a Bloc-Cipher. So this is not about Bloc-Ciphers, not about AES, symmetric crypto, right? This is about a Bloc-Cipher, right? So the first question then naturally is, what is a Bloc-Cipher? And okay, it's not a typo. This is very important. So I put it in here just in case, and I could see twice already at the program. So this is not a typo. I came up with this definition here for this talk. It's a cipher primarily used within a block, right? So then the next question is, what's a cipher? I think we all know that, so I don't need to talk about that. But later in the talk, I want to talk about cipher as algorithms and their implementations. So hardware security and cryptography. And what's a block? That's, I guess, more interesting. A block, this is Google definition, a group of countries or political parties with common interests who have formed an alliance. For example, the Soviet bloc, right? The Soviet bloc and then the Western bloc. So, and this is what I want to talk about. So this is a non-technical talk. This is more like provide new input from observations kind of talk. And the first part is actually on geopolitics. So block is, this is geopolitics. So then, and because this is a very sensitive topic, there's a big, massive disclaimer here. So these are my own personal views and observations. It's mostly really observations that I try to interpret in a specific way. So wherever possible, I try to back it up with data and at least, reliable statements so that you can see, okay, there is a fact. And if you combine it with this fact, there's a reason why you come to these conclusions. But in general, so this discipline or this field of science is not clear, right? There can be different interpretations for the same situation. And you can see it everywhere when you have conflicts. People have different interpretations. So and finally, most of the things I'm talking about here I've radically simplified in order to drive a point, right? So combine all that together and then you can see then the real truth is you have to take this talk almost a pinch, but it's a block of salt, right? And this time, this kind of salt that you need to take. All right, so we're talking about geopolitics and cryptography and their implementations. So first question is, why is it even important? And I like to cite Jamie Dimon here. He says, now may be the most dangerous time the world has seen in decades. That was mid of October. Does anybody know who Jamie Dimon is? Anyone know? Yeah, Victor, you know it? Correct. Correct, yeah, 100%. So his nickname is the King of Wall Street, right? So he's a financial expert. And you're right, Victor, he's the chairman of JP Chase. So his job is to make sure all the money that people give his bank to appreciate the value, right? And he has $3.7 trillion of assets under management. That's roughly the size of the German economy. So I think he needs to be well informed on geopolitics because these things have an impact on supply chain disruptions and whether, maybe trade barriers go up. So I would even say he's probably better informed on geopolitics than many politicians. That's my personal view. That's a hypothesis, if you want. He also said something remarkable this month, actually. And he said, what's happening on the geopolitical front right now is the most important thing for the future of the world. Freedom, democracy, food, energy, and immigration. So if we take these statements as facts or observations that we can trust, then it's clear that geopolitics are highly topical. It's happening right now. They affect everyone, and they have a massive impact on our work. And that's precisely what I want to talk about in this talk. That why geopolitics are actually, coming to our field of research. All right. What's going on? Or not say? I think I get it. Okay, so there was a nice, funny logo here, but anyway, it's gone now. So what's geopolitics? In a way, it's power play. What's power? On a very high level, it's the ability to achieve a goal, and in particular, your goal. So, and if your goal and my goal misalign, then we have a problem. So how can we resolve these problems so that, we still can pursue our goals? Negotiation, but sometimes people just take guns, right? That's simple fact of geopolitics. So guns are very important to project power, to protect yourself, to prohibit people from attacking yourself, or even to achieve your goals with a means of force. The other massive contributing factor to power is called butter, which is a synonym for economic power, GDP, gross domestic product. And that gives you the ability to buy influence. So if you look at Europe, after the Second World War, Germany clearly had no army, so we didn't have guns. But economically, they were pretty powerful. So I would say Germany probably used butter more than guns to achieve their goals and align people on their goals. But now things have changed. Topic Zeitenwende, right? So economic power also gives you the ability to buy guns. Suddenly you can turn your economic power into military power. And also butter or GDP is also important to create new technology, new strategic capabilities that might be used as weapons or that can help even catapult the economy further. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we can somewhat restart this. Yes. Okay. Remember the disclaimer? I simplify things, right? So this is a good example. This is the state of the world from the Second World War until 1991. Very simple, very clean, very lightweight if you want. So after the Second World War, there were pretty much two spheres, two blocks. The Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact on the one hand, and the US-led West on the other hand. And that led to the Cold War. And then in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the US was arguably the only surviving superpower. And what happened then in the decades afterwards is pretty much globalization, right? As a headline. So more and more countries adopted free market policies. We had more and more democracies springing up. So that was all happening in the past 30 years. But nowadays, I think it's fair to say the US is no longer the single dominant superpower, but China is really catching up. And we can see this at many different fronts. But we can also have a look at the facts. So again, I try to get some facts. So this is on a website called Global Firepower. So that compares like geopolitical strengths of countries. And you can compare the US versus China on different high level topics. You can zoom in into all of these. And you can clearly, a lot of people spend a lot of time on analyzing these data. But I would say, if you look at this military strengths, manpower, air power, land power, naval power, and so on and so forth, it looks like a draw, actually. It looks like some have advantages here, some have advantages there. Nevertheless, there is a big differentiator, and that's nuclear weapons. That's called the great equalizer, and the US has just many, many more. So I think it's fair to say the US is still more powerful than China when it comes to guns. If we look at butter, then the economy, then you can see here, this is from October 2023. That's a nominal GDP of the 10 biggest countries. And you can see the US has $27 trillion of GDP, and China has around 17.7. So you can clearly say the US is still more powerful than China. But if you spend $1 in Amsterdam, it gives you less than if you spend $1 in, let's say, a village somewhere in the Netherlands, right? And that the same thing happens in different countries. So the purchasing power is different in different countries. $1 in China gives you more than $1 in the US. And that's another way to correct these data, is then purchasing power parity. And that's what's actually used by most of the economists to compare the strengths of the economy. And if you do the purchasing power parity, you can see China is already ahead of the US. In fact, when you Google what's the greatest economy in the world or the largest, you can see from 2017 onwards, the purchasing power parity of China already overtook the purchasing power of the US. So I think it's fair to say that on an economy scale, China and the US are, I would say, on par. So again, these were the facts I tried to create to come up to justify this observation, which I think is a gut feeling of many people. So is that all of the story? I would say this is not all, because why, if it were globalization, why is it not still the US? Why is a second power, coming up? And if you noticed, 2008, the financial crisis, something happened, something changed. And then during Corona, something changed again. Trump came up in between, Brexit. So there's more market, so trade barriers have been re-erected. So all these things. And that's something people call globalization. I mean, it's a funny term. I just realized when I made this talk, but I think it's a good summary. So globalization is no longer going full steam ahead, but it's slowing. And other data for it? Yes, there's actually a lot of data. And foreign direct investment, for example, peaked in 2008. And a lot of other key indicators for globalization, they all peaked in 2008 after the financial crisis. And there's a lot of, like, The Economist, they have a lot of headlines like bye-bye globalization and so on. So that means the world is already not faster getting together, but only slower. Is the process even worse? And yeah, I mean, there's this talk of decoupling, right? And I mentioned already Corona, supply chain disruptions, nearshoring, right? If you remember, supply chains should get back to decouple the risk from specific events. This is also having a big political dimension. So other terms for that is friendshoring, nearshoring, de-risking, decoupling. Does anybody recognize her? Victor?
Yeah.
And what's her job? Yes, the head of the European Central Bank. So she's really powerful and she knows a bit about the economy. And she mentioned, and that was actually this month, Western countries are increasingly, sorry, I think it was in October. Western countries are increasingly adopting industrial policies that promote friendshoring of strategic industries. To question, what's friendshoring, what's a strategic industry? So friendshoring is explained in this article. And here they say, friendshoring happens when a government pushes businesses to restructure supply chains, shifting production away from geopolitical rivals to friendly powers. So it's no longer only to protect against supply chain disruptions when, in China is a lockdown, but it's really, with a geopolitical lens to reestablish some supply chains away from geopolitical rivals. All right, so that's friendshoring. Anybody, any idea about a strategic industry? Yeah?
Microchips.
Spot on, right? Chip manufacturing, right? Obviously, this is where we work in. So you can see here, there's new investments happening at the moment at an amazing scale, right? The United States is pushing out $165 billion in new investments already for chip manufacturing plants. Germany already has $26.1 billion going to be invested, mostly TSMC, into the big new foundries in Germany, which is like a complete return from what happened in the past 30 years, and so on and so forth. The question is this just a market mechanism, or is there some policy behind it? And yeah, this is actually the output of the industrial policies. Germany puts 20 billion euros of taxpayer money, despite fiscal cuts, into this. So there's a, you know, they say 500 million euros here and there just to really make life hard for parents, but then $20 billion euros, no problem. Let's build some chips here. So this is clearly industrial policy. Same on European level. There's a 43 billion CHIPS Act. And then the US, they have the massive and the biggest of all CHIPS Act. It has $280 billion of funding. But there's something more interesting on the CHIPS Act in the US. So I took this from the website of the White House. It's a fact sheet on the CHIPS and Science Act. It will lower costs, create jobs, or good, strengthen supply chains, good, counter China. So there's a clear, there's a clear geopolitical aspect on it. And this brings me to the next part. We saw US and China. Is it really that we have like two spheres of influence? So you can clearly see there's some mission to bring back things in their own sphere. There's a couple of headlines here. Competitor or adversary, West struggles to define the relationship with Beijing. Another one, China, once Germany's partner in growth, turns into a rival. And that's not just a headline. This is actually from the strategy on China from the German government. And I took this out here. They say, against this backdrop, China is simultaneously a partner, competitor, and systemic rival for the federal government. So for Germany, but also our strategy on China is firmly rooted in the public policy on China of the European Union. So it used to be partner, then it was a competitor, now it turns into a rival. This is part of the decoupling. If we look at the time, if we look at the other side, if you want, China has this One Belt, One Road initiative, OBOR, or the new Silk Road. You can see there's a massive infrastructure framework that has two parts, the land and the sea, the land belt and the sea road. And you can see it goes even all the way to Germany. China also set up the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is the same thing that what the World Bank does or used to do, but this time more under Chinese influence. And they really want the yuan or renminbi as a trading currency because they don't like the US dollar. So these are all aspects of China projecting more power. And one thing is interesting here, I think. India is not part of this OBOR. So it is around India. It takes Sri Lanka and Pakistan, but India is not part of it. At the same time, probably you've heard of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. I think it was coined in 2008, also in the financial crisis, as the up-and-coming developing countries. They're now talking about expansion as BRICS Plus, right? And more countries are interested in joining. UAE, for example, as well. Kazakhstan, Iran. There's a couple of Argentina. There's a couple of countries that are interested in joining the BRICS group. So here, interesting, India is part of it. So India is somehow part of it or not. I'm talking about India in particular because there's a couple of interesting partnerships with India that are not really aligned with the BRICS. So if you look at, have you heard of the new spice route? Yeah. So India has signed a new deal to counter the Silk Road, and that's a deal between India and Middle East, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Greece, and even up to Germany, and also the US is in there, in order to tie India closer to the West. You have another one. It's called ITU2. It's Israel, India, United States, and United Arab Emirates. They have an investment partnership to invest in technology on a nation level. Then you have AUKUS, that's Australia, UK, United States. It's a trilateral security partnership. It's clearly a military alliance. and it's clear whom they want to protect against. And then finally, you have the Quad group: Australia, India, Japan, and US. And it's all geared towards one particular reason. Okay, so I put all of these headlines here just to say, right, yes, we have probably two dominating powers, and they have their own spheres of influence. And I think it's going more into separation. It's more and more decoupling. Is that the end of the story? Will that be how the world looks in 20 years? We don't know, but there's no reason to believe that it couldn't be more. Even not only 2, but even 3 or 4 centers, even 5 maybe, who knows? And India and European Union could be different. We can see that in a later part of the talk, that there's some nuances between the European Union and US. So why, where does this come from? I didn't look at any guns predictions, but I look at butter forecast, and here you can see there's a forecast that by 2075, India will take the United States, China up there, Europe. So this is like, again, butter as a proxy by guns. This could be an outcome. This is a slide from International Political Affairs course from INSEAD. So this is an opinion from the professor, how the world could move on. And it's clearly US and allies, China and allies, India could go either way, or could be a US ally. There's just one outlook that might be coming. All right, so now we spoke a lot about geopolitics. Let's have a look at the Cipher part. And again, Cipher is the algorithm and the implementation. We already spoke about the hardware, which is heavily influenced by geopolitics. Then, does anybody know who's that? Victor. Say again? It's Strasbourg. Okay, it's Ursula von der Leyen, right? And that was on 15 September 2021. It was a talk about cybersecurity. And she said something remarkable. I like it when things are really simplified, but still make sense. She just said, if everything is connected, everything can be hacked, right? It's very clean, very clear. And she used that as a justification for the Cyber Resilience Act, right? And I think this is very, very much true. So cybersecurity is really important because everything gets connected, then everything can get hacked. So cybersecurity is influencing all aspects of our life. So the Cybersecurity Resilience Act came out of it, just came into effect. And we all know that cybersecurity is rooted in the CI triangle: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But what's underneath? What's really driving cybersecurity? Crypto, right? Cryptography is really the technology that enables cybersecurity. From the technological point of view, we have all the processes and the people, but the technology point of view is really crypto, right? So crypto is really, really paramount important for cybersecurity. During that speech, she also said something else, which I found remarkable. And she said, we cannot talk about defense without talking about cyber. And clear, right? Everything is connected, everything can be hacked, every power plant. This is like very interesting in a conflict to tamper with. So cybersecurity has a very, very strong national security, obviously, component, which also is related to defense. And in fact, that's the reason that cryptography is a dual-use technology, right? And I don't know if you know, but if you go, there's all these general export authorizations, and it says dual use, and encryption is explicitly mentioned. There's also national export authorities that say that crypto needs to be export controlled. On the US side, you have the Bureau of Industry and Security, where industry and security intersect, right? And that's encryption and export administration regulation. So crypto is a dual-use technology. So everything you do with crypto could have an impact on the guns side of the geopolitical balance. So there's already a geopolitical aspect for cryptography. But crypto is also a strategic capability. And here I want to have a look at a research center in the Gulf region that has around 1,000 researchers. I heard they have around $500 million in annual budget. I couldn't validate that number. They have 10 research centers, and their mission is to develop the most advanced disruptive technological innovations. So have a look at the 10 research centers. You can see advanced materials, directed energy, AI and digital science, partial space, autonomous robotics, quantum, biotechnology, renewable and sustainable energy, cryptography, and secure systems. So I find it remarkable that, you know, on a national level, they have this massively subsidized research center, all the strategic capabilities, and cryptography is one of the top 10 research topics. I find that remarkable, and it shows really how important the work that you guys are doing is. Next aspect is quantum. Quantum, obviously, quantum computing has a promise to solve a lot of problems, a lot of good applications, but then we all know there's a problem, right? That's a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. And if you combine that with a paper from 1995 from Peter Shaw, right, then discrete logarithm and elliptic curves, unfortunately, it's over for them, right? So we all know that. And that's why we have the post-quantum crypto debate. We don't know when it's coming. We don't know how it's coming. We all believe it will come eventually, but maybe people will not talk about it, but just use it. So that's why there's a lot of uncertainty around it. So how can we solve this problem? I mean, solution one is a NIST, post-quantum crypto competition, already running since nearly 7 years. Call for proposals, several rounds of review, and now they have came up with 4 standards, draft standards, Kyber, Dilithium swing, so MLChem, MLDSA, SLH DSA. They are going to be standardized in first half 2024. Standards will be out, and Falcon will take a bit longer, maybe 9 months later. So we have already 1 key exchange mechanism and 3 digital signature algorithms. Problem solved, you would think. And if you look at this process, it reminds me really, really heavily on previous crypto competitions, right? Like AEAD, SHA-3, the lightweight crypto competition. And what I want to say here is like, it's an open, fair, transparent competition. The brightest minds of the world come together, compete. The best ideas brought forward and survive, and they will be used for all of the entire globe. That was my naive thinking. So, yeah, that's how I looked at it from the beginning, and it's a bit more complicated, I guess. I think other than this solution, which is still a bit risky, risky in a way, depends on your risk profile. There's a new technology, lattice-based, and some people have a lower risk appetite. They prefer non-structured lattices or even hash-based signature schemes, right? That's all based on risk appetite and risk assessment. So the second solution is from the NSA, the Commercial National Security Algorithms. They propose Kyber and Dilithium, but they also propose the hash-based signature schemes, LMS and XMSS, and the multi-tree variant. And the main reason is those are based on hash functions, security is well understood, so there's a trade-off to be made, performance versus risk profile. So you would think that's enough, right? One would think that's enough algorithms to replace and to go forward, and it's sound enough to do. Nope. China and Russia want to have slightly different PQC standards from the US, so they standardize these 3 here. But then there's also, and I mentioned it before, slight nuances. It seems that in Europe there's a lower risk tolerance because ANSI BSI and the National Cybersecurity Centrum, they came forward and they said, let's also use Photocam, right? Let's take a conservative alternative. We believe it's sound and safe. Let's do that. And the same for Macalise, right? So more algorithms, more complexity, right? That's not all of it. South Korea is hosting its own competition. So there's even more algorithms coming. More algorithms, more complexity, right? And here comes the Bloc-Cipher, right? So why would that become a Bloc-Cipher? So new algorithms that are proposed, they're already more complex and resource hungry than RSA or ECC. It's not a multiplication, it's a lattice, and there's a rejection sampling and all these things that need to be implemented and securely implemented. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with all these, I would say, protocol aspects inside the primitive. So if you now have to support, depending on the geography where you want to sell to, more algorithms, then this increases the pain, right? It increases the pain because it's more complex. You have more algorithms to manage, key management. It takes more storage space, and sometimes that might be prohibitively expensive. If you have a lightweight device, you may only have space for one algorithm, right? And it's less efficient. If you have everything in there, it can't be as efficient as if you tailor-made and optimized for a single thing. So in general, from an engineering point of view, I think it's desirable to support less algorithms and optimize for them and make them more secure. So if you don't have to, right, then you don't work across blocks. So if you need to be compatible across blocks or geographies, then this is penalized, right? Because you have more, you have less resources to put on that. But if you focus to stay inside your block, it's kind of incentivized, right? If you just say, my market is just European Union, I just focus on European Union and the NIST stuff, then you're fine, right? So that led me to conclude that, you know, cryptography is actually used as another differentiator between blocks, right? Because if you have different crypto standards, and it might be more challenging to, you know, be what's the name? Compatible. Compatible. On the other hand, it's also understandable why this is happening, because cryptography is so important for national security that it clearly is a sovereign aspect, and everybody wants to be in charge of that. All right, so we spoke a bit about geopolitics, right? We spoke a bit about chip manufacturing, and we spoke a bit about cryptography. So what's in the middle? In the middle is smart cards, right? Or hardware security. I mean, that's precisely. So, hello, you are here. So we all are here, right? Smack in the middle of this. So before I conclude, I'd like to use a statement from NWO on knowledge security as a framework to drive my points here. So NWO, I think, is the Netherlands science organization, right? And they have a policy on knowledge security. And the goal is to prevent the undesired transfer of sensitive knowledge and technology. An undesired transfer of knowledge occurs when our national security is at risk. Again, you have an interlink between technology and defense, if you want. They also say that at the same time, geopolitical powers shifts are taking place. So that's takeaway number one. Major geopolitical changes are currently happening, and they have an increasing separation into spheres of influence. The terms here are friendshoring, decoupling. So this is happening, and I think this is going to continue to happen if moving forward. You have economics and security intertwined. That was the guns and butter aspect, right? Even commercial technology might be dual use, and knowledge and innovation are increasingly seen as strategic instruments of power. So cryptography and chip manufacturing are dual-use technologies. There's no weapon without a chip. And you need encryption to make sure nobody hijacks your weapon. Are strategic capabilities, for sure. And they're increasingly used in geopolitical context. With that, I'd like to add that cryptography standard selection is clearly influenced by geopolitics because crypto is a sovereign aspect, and in a way it adds to the decoupling process further. That's it. Thank you for your time.
I'll invite the audience.
I have one question.
Yes.
It strikes me that at all, Russia is not mentioned in the last, in your last picture at the power. How do you see that? Is it completely gone?
We can talk over coffee about that. No, I think, I mean, I try to be really not, tipping on somebody's toe here.
Yeah.
I feel like this picture sums it up pretty well.
Under influence of China.
Yes, exactly. There will be allies, and they are like, yeah, I think this is like where I see it. I think, yeah.
Okay.
So thanks for the talk. I was just wondering, this is what you highlighted here, over the 30 or 40 years, like crypto has moved from military to public research basically, and that's in line with of transfer and so on. And we think like the dual use problem and the fact that the blocks, is there a threat to the current crypto model and the research for cryptography?
Good point, right? So I came to Asian crypto in 2000, right? I started IT security engineering in 2000. That was even before AES was standardized. So I noticed AES is going to be standardized. So I came to believe we have this open academic driven research community. Crypto military, yeah, that might be the non-cipher, right? So never had any contact points with that. And in fact, while preparing this talk, I realized then how closely crypto actually is, how important that is for military use cases and so on. So I think it's not a threat. I think there is still, and I think it's the best outcome is if everybody works together on this, right? I think that's the model we should use. If you separate yourself into different spheres, you have a smaller talent pool, and maybe that spark of ingenuity doesn't happen because two people can't meet. So it's better to bring everybody together. But I think it's increasingly challenging to do research across these blocks, right? So, and to know this might be easier to, spend your time better on other ground applications rather than trying to get a ground with Russia or China or other countries where people say like, no, we really don't want, collaborate with them.
Thank you for the presentation. One question about what you explained, like how do you see, in your opinion, this rise, mainly about like the new crypto algorithms, this rise of the different standardizations of different countries or blocks? Is it more because they want to get an influence, or because we are afraid of some standards to be dropped, some backdoors? Like with the DSi story, we don't know who trust now. So
yeah, I think there is that's a good point. That's a good example. Huh? No, I think it's and I thought about it a lot, and in particular in the past couple of weeks. I think it really boils down to risk appetite. It's a trade-off, right, between efficiency and risk. I mean, risk is, again, a lot of the research community, I believe, is on the conclusion that structured lattices do not pose an unacceptable risk over unstructured lattices, right? So that's my feeling. That's why Dilithium, Kyber, all these structured lattices are used, and they come with performance gains. That's why you use it, right? So if you take that out because you say, well, I still want to hedge my bets, then you go to Falcon, right? And if you want to really hedge your bets, you go to Mecha-Lease or hash-based signature schemes, which have different trade-offs, mostly for performance. So maybe there are applications where you really don't want to take any risk because a failure is like too catastrophic, and you don't care about the efficiency gains. that's why I think people are opting for this. But maybe potentially, standards that have been, backdoored influence that decision.
So maybe you could see a positive side of this Bloc-Cipher, because by building on this diversity in crypto mechanisms, we actually pumping up the studies, the different ideas, and with these different standards, this makes more people studying more different primitives, and then research.
Agreed. I think that's also the position ANSI is mentioning. Yeah. They want to create a large variety of algorithms. They want to prescribe in order to because they don't want to stifle innovation. They want to encourage innovation. And I agree. I think again this comes down to risk assessment and the timelines. If you believe you have 30 years time, 50 years time, let's do some research first and see which idea survives. If you believe you have 10 years time and you have to start now, then let's go, hash functions, go. So I think there's different perceptions and I think that's what mostly contributes to the different algorithms. It's the same as hybrid, right? ANSI and Germany, they say you need to use hybrid DSi. I think ANSI says until 2030 and then it's fine. Whereas Germany, I think, says, no, you should use it always. If you use lattice-based, unless you use hash-based signature schemes, then you can go immediately post-quantum.
I have actually two related questions. So one, as you mentioned, like these blocks have there are different algorithms being standardized by different blocks, different countries. Do you still see like more algorithms popping up, especially in the obscurity part where we have like proprietary algorithms, not public, coming up? We have seen this in the past for Bloc-Ciphers, for example. Like you see, like we might be dealing with more.
So I mean,
repeat the question, please.
The question is like we are seeing like post-quantum algorithms coming from different parts of the world, standardized for that. Do you see like more algorithms coming in, and especially do we see non-public algorithms coming in? Because although not recommended for security by obscurity, is practiced by many people.
So I mean, first, nobody should invent their own crypto, right? Clear. But there is this whole Street A or Type A kind of algorithms, like military or national security grade algorithms that are really kept secret, which to my knowledge, I have no insights, but it's the same approach that China took here for the commercial algorithms. These ideas like in IDIS Inc., there are slight modifications of other standards. So then the security proofs still hold, and you can change things. If you take an AES, you can change the S box. If it meets certain parameters, you can change the shift row offset. You can change the coefficients of the MDS as long as it's still an MDS. And all the security proofs still beautifully aligned. So it's still secure, and there's no reason to believe it's not secure, but it's still obscured, right? You add an additional layer of complexity, which gives you more security. And I think this is what's happening here. I mean, not every country has the manpower of China or India, so that they can come up with new algorithms. There's a lot of countries with 10 million people, 20 million, 5 million. They can't just come up with something from scratch. So I believe they probably take existing standards and then slightly modify them within the security parameters, and then have their own obscured version, which they use for high security communication.
And also, like the second question, when you talk about the Venn diagram where smart card is at the center,
yeah,
I think there's also a problem for the manufacturers, because like when AES was standardized 15 years down the line, we saw AI being accelerated, like in not specialized but general purpose hardware. Now with these many algorithms, are there some core components that can be identified that accelerating them would actually help a larger customer base, or again, you
Yeah.
see block-wise?
Yeah, we are looking at that. I mean, I work for Pico Shield, right? We do hardware accelerator, so we look at that for sure. I mean, what you can say is, there's also this aspect of crypto agility, right? So you don't know which of the algorithms will survive, you don't know which one needs to be tweaked, you don't know if new ones come up. But that means you can't put everything really deep down in hardware, right? There needs to be some firmware component to be flexible. I think it's clear there's a lattice-based accelerator, so you can do all the lattice NTT acceleration, and then a hash-based accelerator. So you have SHA-2, SHA-3 in there, or Shake. Some of them have other hash functions, but most of the LMS and XMSS specified by IETF and CNSA 2.0, they use SHA-2 and Shake. Right? So if you have that accelerated in hardware, and I guess many hardware already have that, you just need a firmware layer on top to compute the. There's other challenges with LMS and XMSS, but Sphinx Plus also uses Shake.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that's a question.
Yeah, so I heard another take about the US and China chip war, and it was a bit more mild. They said that the US wants to make sure that they always have a safe second supplier for their electronics. So they said that there will be some tension, but it won't be too much. What is your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, let me just show what so I don't want to hype up any conflicts or anything, right? It's clear that China and the US have some goals that are not aligned. And it's at the center is a chip manufacturing island, right? And I guess part of the reasons why there's so money poured into chip manufacturing is that people believe there's a fair chance of a conflict that might disrupt supply chains in the future. So that's why a lot of chip manufacturing goes somewhere else. And I agree with you that it's clearly from an economic point of view, availability point of view, that's already wise. But then you go to the website of the White House, and that's the Biden administration, that's not the Trump administration. And this is what's written there, right? We do this to counter China. So I think that's pretty clear.
So welcome to the first technical session of CARDIS 2023. So this is a session on fault attacks. We have 4 talks and a total of 110 minutes to cover them in. So I figure it'll be 20 minutes per talk and 5 minutes for questions and answers. After that, we still have a buffer of 10 minutes. So if you go over by 1 or 2 minutes, I'll allow that, but nothing more than that, please. So the first talk in the session is called Microarchitectural Insights into Unexplained Behaviors under Clock Glitch Fault Injection. The authors are Ihab Al-Sher, Bryce Colombier, Christophe Deleuze, Vincent Dehoul, and Paolo Maestri, and I believe Ihab is secretary.
Thanks. So, hello everyone. My name is Ihab Al-Sher, and I'm from University Grenoble-Alpes in France, and I'm going to present you our work entitled Microarchitectural Insights into Unexplained Behaviors under Clock Glitch Fault Injection. And I will start with an introduction. Okay. First of all, what is a fault injection attack? It is an active physical attack where the attacker will try to change the normal behavior of a device by introducing one or more faults, then observing the anonymous behavior. The faulty output can be further exploited as a vulnerability. To inject a fault, there are different techniques. The most known ones are applying variations to the clock signal, which is known as clock glitch, or applying perturbation to the power supply, which is known as voltage glitch, or exposing the device to electromagnetic pulses or to laser beams. So in order to secure digital systems against fault attacks, we need to characterize and analyze and understand the effects of the fault injection to build what is called fault models. And fault models are abstract representations of the real fault effects, and they refer to different levels of abstractions. So they can be built at assembly level, binary encoding level, gate level, etc. fault models are necessary to perform vulnerability analysis and to design countermeasures against fault attacks. So what is the problem? The problem is that having improper fault effect characterization and misunderstanding the effects of the fault injection would lead to propose inaccurate and incomplete fault models. And using these fault models would lead to design non-optimal countermeasures. So we will have either overprotections, which will affect the cost and the performance of the device, or we will have underprotections, which will affect the security of the device. So our main objective is to propose realistic and reliable fault models at different levels of abstractions. In a previous work of us, we were able to propose two fault models at binary encoding level of instructions. They are called skip a specific number of bits and skip and repeat specific number of bits. This number of bits is related to the flash memory access size or to an instruction buffer size. And what is interesting is that the effect of these two fault models at higher levels of abstraction is different based on the alignment of instructions in memory. So they refer to complete instructions if we fetch aligned instructions, but they refer to incomplete instructions, like 2/2 of 2 instructions, if we fetch misaligned instructions. Thanks to these two fault models, we were able to explain many of the observed faulty behaviors when performing fault injection, but not all of them. So in this work, we present a new in-field fault model at binary encoding level. It is called partial update fault model. It comes in two subcases, partial update from previous value and partial update from pre-charge value. Thanks to this model, we are able to explain almost the remaining unexplained faulty behaviors. We also show in this work that the partial update from pre-charge value is instruction independent with high probability, but it depends on the target device and its physical implementation with high probability. We also show that with the fault injection, we can execute new instructions that are not in the original code, even with a different length of encoding. And finally, we make use of the presented fault models to modify the program counter. So before digging into details, what we did exactly. So our approach is like a reverse engineering iterative process. From the results of the fault injection, we try to infer fault models at binary encoding level of instructions. And then we use the in-field fault model to perform fault simulation. And the results of the two operations, the injection and the simulation, are then compared to confirm the use of the fault model. So at that time, we are able to explain the observed faulty behavior. So our fault model is realistic. Thanks to this approach, we inferred the fault model partial update, which means not all flip-flops within a register or a buffer in the fetch path end up corrupted. Some flip-flops will be updated correctly, and some of them will be updated in a faulty way. So the question was, what is the faulty part? Based on the glitch parameters and the faulty register, we found that the faulty part might be related to the pre-charge value of a corresponding wire or pass, and it is explained as multi-bit reset over the fetched data, assuming the pre-charge values are zeros, but also the faulty part might be related to the previous value that the register had in a previous clock cycle, and it is explained as a bitwise OR between the value that the register should have in a normal way and at a given clock cycle, and the value that the register had in the previous clock cycle. However, we found that bitwise OR might be applied to all flip-flops, and we called it full merge, or to part of them, and we called it partial merge, as we will see in the next slides. So before showing the results, our experimental setup is like that. We performed clock glitch fault injection campaigns in which we had to tune 3 kinds of parameters: the width of the glitch, the shape of the glitch with respect to a target clock cycle, and the delay where to inject the fault with respect to a synchronization trigger signal. And we have used the chip whisperer environment to do the injection, as it is easily configurable. So our target device is a 32-bit microcontroller, embeds ARM Cortex-M4 processor. It supports thumb2 instruction set, which is a variable length instruction set that's offered to 2 lengths of encoding, 16 and 32-bit instructions. In this microcontroller, the flash memory access size is fixed and equals 64 bits. And because the supported instruction set is a variable instruction set, that means we can fetch either aligned or misaligned instructions. Now we go to the experimental results, and I'm going to show you the results based on the subcase fault model, and I will start with the related results to the partial update from pre-charge value. So our target instruction is abstract subtraction instruction. It is a 16-bit instruction, has the encoding 3EFF. As I said, pre-charge value cause bit resets, so it is logical to target a highly Hamming weight instruction to observe various faulty behaviors. And why exactly this 3EFF? Because resetting bits over this instruction will result in an instruction that we can identify with high probability. However, because we fetch at a given clock cycle 64 bits, and the 16-bit can reside in 4 different positions within this 64 bits, we had to perform 4 different injection campaigns in which we change the position of the target instruction from one location to another, as you can see in this table. This will give us information if the position matters, like for the observed faulty behaviors or not. We will see that in the next slide. We performed for each campaign more than 20,000 executions, and each execution can result in 1 of 3 different cases. Either crash, that means we observe the crash, or a reset because we performed the injection, or a silent, that means the output is similar to a normal output, or a fault, that means we observed a faulty behavior thanks to the fault injection. And you can see that most of the executions led to faulty behaviors. What is interesting is that all of the observed faulty behaviors were classified under 2 fault models, either skip or the partial update from the pre-charge value. If we want to dig into details for the partial update from the pre-charge value, here are the figures that correspond to the results. So on the y-axis, you see the encoding of the faulty executed instructions. And on the x-axis, you see the number of times that we observed a specific execution at a specific injection campaigns. You can see that for each position, there are some instructions that are more probable to be executed than the others. And if we look to the different positions, we can see that the faulty executed instructions are different from one position to another. That means the faulty behaviors depends on the position of the instruction, not on the instruction itself. And this means that the faulty behaviors depends more on the physical implementation of the device, not on the targeted program itself. To better understand this, we proposed a metric called bit sensitivity. It measures how much a bit is sensitive to be reset. And here are the bit sensitivities related to the 4 injection campaigns we performed. So for each position, you can see that the bit sensitivity is different from one bit to another. So on the y-axis, the bit index, and on the x-axis, the bit sensitivity value as a probability between 0 and 1. So you can see that some bits are more probable, are more vulnerable, let's say, than the others, and this explains why some instructions are more probable to be executed than the others because of the fault injection. And you can see that the bit sensitivities are different from one position to another, and that confirms that the position matters, not the instruction itself. To better confirm this, we target different instructions. So here, I'm giving you the bit sensitivities when targeting 3EFF on the left at first and third position, and 3B7D at right, and also the corresponding first and third position. You can see that the values of the bit sensitivities are almost similar when we target different instructions. And this again confirmed that the target instruction does not matter, but what is matter is the position of the instruction, and that means the physical implementation of the device itself. To better understand the dependency with respect to the target device, we used another microcontroller, which has the same, it is the same design, but a new microcontroller that we did not use before. And even when we target the same instruction, 3EFF, we were able to observe different bit sensitivities between different microcontrollers, even they have the same series or the same characteristic. Again, this gives the intuition that the faulty behaviors depends on the target device, but not on the instruction. So this is related to the partial update from pre-charge value. In the next two slides, I'm going to show you two examples that we can explain using the partial update from previous value, one for the full merge and one for the partial merge. So our target code, what you see in the left in green and blue, 64 bits in green and 64 bits in blue. With the fault injection, we were able to observe the execution on the right. You can see that the green are executed. Then we executed the two add instructions in red. So how we can explain these two add instructions? If we perform a bitwise OR between the green, the 64 bits in green and the 64 bits in blue, we will have the encoding of the two instructions in red. What is interesting about this example is that although in the original code we have only 16-bit instructions, we were able, because of the fault injection, to execute 32-bit instructions that are not originally in the code, and even with different length of encoding, like 32. This is just an example, like this works for different target codes. So in the next example, it is related to the partial merge. The same way we can explain the faulty behavior with a bitwise OR, but here we apply the bitwise OR on specific digits, not all the digits. If it is all the digits, it will be like the previous example for merge, but if it is applied to some digits, it will be partial merge. So now, how I can use the presented fault models to perform like vulnerability analysis or to think about better countermeasure. And for that, we are. Okay. So I was saying I will use the presented fault models to modify the program counter. So our target code is what you see on the left. What is nice is that the third, the red add instruction at line 3, the add R6 R10 X46C7 has the encoding of F201 46C7. The least significant 16 bits of this instruction is a valid encoding of a 16-bit instruction, which is move PC R8. So if I execute move PC R8, I will change the value of the program counter to the address stored in register R8. And in my target program, R8 has the address corresponds to line 11. So if I target instruction 3 and I execute move PC R8, I will be able to jump from line 3 to line 11. So now, based on my fault models, how I can execute move PC R8. First scenario, if the code is misaligned, specifically this instruction, the read instruction, that means the first 16-bit will be fetched at a given clock cycle, and the second 16 bits will be fetched at the next clock cycle. So if I skip the first part, I will be able to execute move PC R8 because what will arrive to the core in the decode state is only the second half. And this is theoretically. Experimentally, the success rate for this scenario was 100%. Over 10,000 executions, I was able to execute move PC R8 10,000 times. Now, the second scenario, if the code is aligned, and I made the code aligned by just adding a dummy instruction. So in this scenario, now all the encoding corresponds to the read add is fetched at 1 clock cycle. So the question is, what is the fault model that I can use to execute move PC R8? As I said, partial update from pre-charge value cause bit resets. If I reset some bits over the most significant digit of the read add, like on the F digit, I will create two 16-bit instructions. The first one based on what the bits that I reset. The second one, if I didn't touch the least significant 16 bits, will be 46C7. So this is, again, theoretically. Experimentally, the success rate was 0.71%. So that means I was able to execute move BCR8 71 times. Now, I understand the effect. I understand the fault model. Can I propose a simple countermeasure for this specific example? If I am the one who writes the code, this code, or I am the one who controls the compiler, I can force not using R6 as a destination register. For example, I use R2. If I did so, I will change the encoding of the least significant 16 bits from 46C7 to 42C7. In this way, there is no fault model that can, from my fault models that I explained, that can lead to execute move BCR8. This is theoretically. Experimentally, the success rate was 0%, even if the code is misaligned, and even if I used the same parameters that led previously to 100%. So now the code is protected. Is there a way to execute move BCR8 even if the code is protected? Actually, yes, if I considered other threat models. And the threat model that I consider here is a Trojan. So if I am able to add a dummy code that has no effect on the original code, but it implements a Trojan that can be activated by fault injection, then I will be able to execute move BCR8. My Trojan is just the dummy code that you see on the left. Mostly has nothing to do with move R0, R0. I just have the compare and the logical shift left, which can matter. So what is interesting is that if I performed a bitwise OR between the green and the blue, I will have the encoding of 46C7. So basically, I applied the fault model partial update from previous value in the case of full merge. And again, for 46C7 is move BCR8. The success rate in this example was 95, more than 95%. Keep in mind that such threat models can be considered if we consider that the malicious user is the software developer himself or the compiler that we use to compile the code. Finally, to conclusion and perspectives. As a conclusion, I just presented a new fault model called partial update fault model. It comes in two subcases, partial update from pre-charge value and partial update from previous value. It allowed to explain a lot of the observed faulty behaviors. We also examined the dependency of the partial update from the pre-charge value with respect to the target program and the target device. We used the presented fault models to modify the program counter. I will just show you how we can solve such issue with a simple countermeasure, cost-effective, like register substitution. In terms of perspectives, to proper formalize the protections that I just talked about, to target different architectures from ARM Cortex-M to see if we can generalize these fault models to different architectures, and to use also alternative fault injection techniques to see if other injection techniques can lead to results can be explained by these fault models. And here I can tell we already tried with voltage glitch and it works. Like our fault model were able to explain faulty behaviors observed by voltage glitch as well, not only clock glitch. And finally, to have more investigation on the target device dependency with respect to the partial update from pre-charge value. Is it related to aging effect, like the differences between the target devices, or to process variation, or to environmental conditions, and how such things can affect the bit sensitivity in general? Thank you, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Yes.
One question. This is all about applying the clock glitch, eh?
Yes, what I presented is for
how do you do that in practice? Because particularly that register, it has its own clock. How do you get there?
Well, as I said, we used the chip whisperer environment, which has basically like the hardware needed to perform the clock glitch. So I'm not the one who creates the hardware related to generate the clock glitch, but I'm using something already exists, like chip whisperer to do so.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Well, basically, it is like you have two signals
one for the clock and one for the glitch, and you do like the XOR, and you generate this signal is going to the device instead of the.
Exactly, that point going into the device is quite tricky, huh?
Yeah, that's why I use chip whisperer.
Okay, good. Right, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Yes, you said you tried this on two different microcontrollers. You looked at what these microcontrollers have in common and what differences they have.
I didn't hear you.
You said you tried this on two different microcontrollers.
Mhm.
If you look at what these two microcontrollers have in common and what's different between them, does there keep communication? Where that fault is actually happening, is it more on the CPU side, inside the instruction encoder, for example, or is it more on the memory interface side and the instructions read from flash?
Well, for the two different microcontrollers, actually they are the same series, the same design, but one of them is old that we used many times, and one of them that I just used for this experiment. And for where exactly the fault happens, well, in this work and additional works that we already did, we found that this exactly happened between the flash memory interface and at the beginning of the decode stage. So it can be at the flash memory interface, it can be in the bus, and it can be at the beginning of the core. And all of them valid.
Right. So do you expect
But not after, sorry, but not after, because if you have seen the fault related to 64 bits, but what goes to the decode stage is only 32 bits. So you just guarantee from that it happens before.
Okay, so would you expect this to work if you took a different microcontroller from a different manufacturer, which also says Cortex M4?
Well, actually, we tried with different Cortex-M, like Cortex-M0, M3, and M4, and it works. But for different architecture from Cortex-M, it is a perspective.
Okay,
Thanks. Thanks for your question.
Any other questions? Actually, I have one. Have you tried to attack any symmetric key to targets like AES? Would it be easy?
Well, with not this partial default model, with the skip and repeat, in a different work, we target AES, an implementation of AES, and with a single glitch, we were able to recover the key.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, let's thank the speaker again for a fascinating talk. Okay, the next talk is called an in-depth security evaluation of the Nintendo DSi gaming console. The authors are Sijs, Leonard Houters, Benedict Gerlix, and Ingrid Schemper-Peter. And the speaker is
Hey, I'm DCY. Welcome to my talk. It's it's mainly divided in two big parts. It's extracting all the code that's actually in the device and then analyzing and finding an exploit. But let's first start with an introduction. What's this thing? It's a gaming console. You may have seen it, released in 2008. It has two ARC CPUs, and unlike many other consoles, because there have been many jailbreaks, the security of this one hasn't really been analyzed much. But of course, I wasn't the first one to ever look at this console, so previous jailbreaks already exist, but they aren't very good, and they also still rely on the eMMC being present and valid. And 15 years after, these eMMC chips are actually starting to get bad, and they start to fail, and then your console doesn't boot anymore, and that's not good. So, in a bit more detail, this looks like this. So you have where's the pointer? Right, so the SoC with the CPU and some RAM and some other things. And the eMMC, which is non-volatile memory, which contains a second stage bootloader and also the system menu. And there's also the DRAM chip present. So when the console boots, it first executes the boot ROM, which loads a second bootloader stage from the eMMC into SRAM and decrypts it. And of course, if the eMMC is dead, the decryption will go wrong, and then booting doesn't really work anymore. But in case it worked, it will the second stage will run from SRAM, load the system menu, also decrypt it, read it into DRAM. And there's a buffer overflow in here. Someone else already found this. But of course, if you want to use it, it's already too late in case the eMMC is dead. So you can't do much with it. But if it still works, the screen finally turns on and the system menu starts running. This looks like this. It will load the game also into DRAM. And right before it actually executes the game, it will use what's called the SCFG or sconfig system MMIO registers, which are used to have some very primitive form of isolation by just disabling hardware blocks by power gating or clock gating. And you can't turn them back on until you reboot the device. And there is no operating system, no trusted execution environment, so this is really primitive. But yeah, let's actually have a look at these boot ROMs. So they look a bit like this. They start with exception vectors, which are always present at runtime. So they're actually pointed to SRAM, so that at runtime, a game can actually put their own interrupt there. They also contain some utility routines, which also need to be present at runtime, otherwise they're not very useful. And the second half consists of boot code. Now, using the sconfig registers, the system menu will actually, right before the second boot stage happens, this boot code will also get hidden away, and you can't ever read it back or re-enable it back. And you need some way to get past that. Now, one interesting thing is that this SRAM memory here, actually the contents persist across resets. So if you now fill it with a payload and some NOPSLETs that jump to that payload, then you reset the device. And with the reset vector, the chip starts running its boot code again. If you insert a fault here that causes an undefined instruction exception, it will jump to the undefined instruction exception vector that's here. That one points to SRAM, and then you execute your own code because the payload is still there. So now you have code execution on the ARM7 while the boot ROM is still running. Now that's all nice in theory. In practice, it looks like this. So you have the this thing does not work very well. So you have the target here. That's what's left of the console. On top, you have the chip shouter here, which is the EMFI injection probe. There's lots of ugly wiring underneath with the Raspberry Pico to actually control the setup, reboot the device when needed, and so on. Yeah, eventually this works. So if you want to try it out, here's the chat3 hash. You can try it yourself. I'm not lying, but there is a problem here. And that's the ARM7 boot ROM only contains IO driver code, but not the actual interesting cryptographic code. So we need to extract the ARM9. So how do we do that? Well, by reverse engineering the ARM7, you get this sort of view where they both do some initialization. The ARM7 loads the second boot stage, the ARM9 verifies it. And then, interestingly, ARM7 is the one that locks away the boot ROMs using the sconfig registers for both cores, and the ARM9 waits until that's done. Now, if you, again, use the exploit from the first extraction, you can, in your payload, pretend you are the regular ARM7 boot ROM, continue booting as usual, but then you can quote-unquote forget to write to the sconfig registers and lock away the boot ROMs. And that means the ARM9 will get stuck, in an infinite loop, waiting and waiting and waiting for that to happen. If you then inject a second fault here, the ARM9 can jump out of that loop and then continue booting. So if we then zoom out, so this first block was this previous slide, and then continue booting, and then you get to your game, which can be hacked easily. And then you say, oh wait, the ROMs are still available, and then you can save them to the SD card. So that, in practice, that looks a bit more like this. This is from a logic analyzer. So you have the reset line toggling here at the very beginning. Then we inject one fault, which is hardly visible here. And then this first ROM boot stage runs, and then the system grinds to a halt because the ARM9 is stuck waiting. Then you just inject more faults until it eventually works, and then you see all the activity from the boot ROM being read out. So that's nice, it works. And after reverse engineering, we can actually see real code that does real cryptographic verification stuff. So that's good. Now, that's all fun, but of course, someone said that the difference between science and messing around is writing things down. So I also wrote some stuff down. And the first interesting thing to see here is that, when we actually inject a fault, there's this one peak where we can get lots of successes and then a long trail of very low successes. Where does that come from? Well, interestingly, in the payload code, I put a little bit of code that dumps all the CPU registers, and one of them is the CPSR, the current program status register. And there's this number here, which might not seem much, but it tells you that the CPU is in system mode and not exception mode. And that means there was no undefined instruction exception actually happening. And interestingly, if you then look at the actual code of the boot ROM, it first does some initialization stuff, but then it actually starts clearing the entire SRAM. So what's actually happening here is that we directly corrupt the program counter and then end up somewhere into the NOP sled. And then the NOP sled jumps into the payload. But of course, the later and later we do this, the more of the SRAM will actually get cleared, which means the success rate will actually end up being lower the more time passes. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. And another pointer to this actually being a program counter corruption is that by increasing the coil voltage, we first get some successes and then none, which is kind of weird. And the reason this happens is that there's this other nice paper which also shows that if you increase the voltage on the coil of the EMF5 probe slightly, you can get a few corruptions, but then if you keep increasing and increasing the voltage, you get more and more bit corruptions. And if we look at the instruction I was actually targeting, probably, I only need a small corruption to take control over the program counter, but with a big corruption, you get a completely different instruction that's of no use anymore. So that's, again, probably why it's a direct program counter corruption. Anyway, with that out of the way, we can finally have a look at how the boot process actually works. So you have the ARM9 at the top with its address space, the ARM7 with its address space. There's a SPI flash and of course the eMMC. And the first thing that happens is ARM7 reaches the configuration byte from the SPI flash and then sends it to the ARM9. And the configuration bytes basically tells the device what boot medium to boot from. Is it the SPI flash or the eMMC or something else? And typically it's the eMMC. So it reads the boot header from the eMMC and also sends it to the ARM9. This boot header is of a particular format. It has the ARM9 binary, where to load it from the eMMC, what size it is, what address to load it into RAM, and then the same thing for the ARM7. It has an RSA signature and also some SRAM mapping configuration bytes because SRAM is complicated on this target. Anyway, this RSA signature, normally you have like one hash and a bunch of padding bytes inside. That's not the case here. So you have two hashes of the two binaries, but then also the hash of the boot header and the hash of all the previous fields and also a random AES key for some reason. And that's a lot of things and kind of weird. But anyway, after this is all checked and validated, it will load the first binary, use EMA, decrypt it, and then there's two options here, which is also present in the boot options. It will either load it from, into the ARM7's RAM and then map the physical chunk of RAM to the ARM9, or it will actually use the flash to send it over. That's an implementation detail that will actually be very relevant soon. And then it does the same thing for the ARM9 binary. And then it checks the hashes, and then if it's correct, it will boot. If it's not correct, it will stop. Now, how do we exploit this? There's this weird boot header structure which looks weird, like it's home-made cryptography. That's not a good thing. It's old primitives like SHA-1. Why? Now, of course, it's not a standardized thing, but I couldn't really actually find any kind of exploit at all here, which was kind of interesting. And secondly, there wasn't really a parser so I couldn't find parser bugs. There's no complex protocol like USB, so I couldn't find the bug in a protocol handler, so I needed to do something else. There's this interesting bit of code which checks the 2 hashes in the boot header. And it's handled by this one statement, which corresponds to this move instruction. If you can inject a false to skip or correct it, you can actually invalidate these 2 hashes at the same time, because this one move instruction is load bearing. But of course, you have these 2 blobs with these 2 hashes, which will still get checked. So if you actually want to take control, you still need to get past these 2 hash checks. And that's how it can be done, because if I go back to the previous slide, you have the binary information with the information of where to load the binary. That's not validated anymore. So we can just say, hello, ARM7, please load this boot state to this binary to your stack, and it will just do that. Now we can use return-oriented programming to take control over the core, and so on. And a little bit later, we have a full code execution on the ARM9. And then we are the ARM9, you can say, hello, ARM7, yeah, the hash tag of this binary, it's good, please trust me, it's all fine. Please start loading your code now and load it into your SRAM, and ARM7 will happily oblige and do that. And then we can also take control over the ARM7. So we have code execution on both cores with just injecting one single fault. I made a mod chip for this, which looks like this. You have this tiny PCB that sits on top of the big one. It uses some kind of connector that's already present, which is really useful. So if you want to install this yourself, you only have to do a little bit of soldering. So that's all nice and practical. It kind of works, but I'm working on a second version, so that's why I'm not able to show you a demonstration, but trust me, it works. So that's mostly everything. So you could say, okay, it's broken, but this is 15 years after it's been released. So Nintendo probably doesn't care, because it has done its fine. It has done what it's had to do. It doesn't really financially matter anymore. Even though it has no operating system, no trusted execution environment, really bad cryptography. And why did that happen? Well, there are a bunch of other devices. Can someone tell me what these have in common? Here's the answer. They have really bad vulnerabilities in their boot ROMs. Does someone know why? It's USB most of the time. And USB is a complicated protocol, lots of places where you can get really bad bugs in there. And of course, the DSi, if you have no USB, you don't have any vulnerabilities there. So if you ever find yourself having to implement a boot ROM, keep it simple, and then you won't have much of attack surface. Secondly, in this work, I used a second-order fault injection attack. Some people think that's not really a thing that practically happens. Well, here I did some. And finally, I broke DRM, but that's used to actually preserve the console, because someone else already exported it to do all the piracy. So I was thinking, okay, for banking cards, it's probably a good way to completely lock down, but for random IFV things someone would place into their home, the chances that some kind of burglar first breaks into the house and then starts messing with the electronics, that's going to be pretty low. The chance that the device owner himself will probably attack the device to, for example, remove some kind of spying or advertising thing, that chance is going to be a bit higher. So one thing I want to say is that just putting hardware security in every device ever is maybe not the best idea ever. That's all I have, thank you. And the slides are on this URL.
We are well within time, so I have time for questions. Yes.
I have a question regarding the repeatability of that, like how, if I will start to do it, do you expect that it's pretty straightforward, or shall I prepare myself for hard time extracting.
So I know that another team has actually reproduced this work already, so I know it's possible. But of course, it's a gaming console, not some kind of development kit. So you need some kind of familiarity with the hardware. You can't just have a manual. Like there's a manual that someone reverse engineered, which shows you how to do the hardware. But you know, there's some soldering you have to do. There's quite a bit of setup, but in the end, it does work. So it's not super difficult, in my opinion.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Did you responsibly disclose your findings to Nintendo? And if yes, how it happened?
Well, I looked into how I would do it. Nintendo has a HackerOne page where they first wanted bugs for the 3DS and then bugs for the Switch. And because the 3DS, went out of support and also got hacked pretty badly, they just didn't bother with 3DS bugs anymore. And now I come here with an even older console, and I can't really report it. So I looked at their support website. There's lots and lots of pages where you can ask for lots and lots of support, but not security stuff. So in the end, I just gave up and thought, okay, it's 15 years old. All the commercial games have been released. People can already do piracy with the old jailbreak, so I just didn't bother in the end.
Nice presentation. You presented actually a lot of work. And it's a huge amount of work with very different parts. Could you tell if one was more time consuming than the other?
I mean, this was actually for my master's thesis, and I'm not entirely sure what was actually the most difficult. I think what I spent the most time is actually getting the payload for the ARM7 to actually do the second order fault attack to work, because there were lots of annoying bugs where the system would just stop working for no reason. That was really hard to debug. Also because there's no debug UART, so I had to roll my own thing to get a patch channel communication, which is really fun. And it was at one point I was almost stuck there and almost gave up, but in the end it worked. So
like this.
Are there any other questions? If not, let's thank the speaker again. Okay. The next talk is a differential fault attack against deterministic Falcon signatures. The authors are Sven Bauer and Fabrizio De Santis. And Sven is presenting.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. Okay, this is about a differential fault attack against deterministic Falcon. Okay, as you all know, Falcon is a post-quantum signature scheme. It's being standardized by NIST at the moment. It's based on the GPV framework. I'll say a bit about what that is later on the next few slides. The GPV framework uses a hash and sign paradigm. In standard Falcon, so what you find in the NIST draft standard, for example, this message hashing, the hash of the message that you compute to start with, that is randomized. So you hash the message twice, 3 times, 4 times, you get a different value back because it's just a random string stuck to the front of it. There's a reason for that. I'll explain that in a moment. There are, however, use cases for deterministic signatures coming from sort of the blockchain words, NARCs, and so on. And so there's actually a specification for a deterministic Falcon variant. So in that case, you don't stick a completely random string in front of the message. It's something deterministic. So if you sign the same message twice, you get the same signature. Okay, so Falcon uses something called a trapdoor sampler. We'll have a look at that, what that is. We'll inject a fault in that. Strategy is this gives us different signatures for the same message hash, which should of course not happen with a deterministic signature scheme. From that, you can get short lattice vectors, bad sign, yeah. Lattice crypto is always based on sort of an attacker not getting short vectors. And from there, we can get to the private key. So that's what we're going to do in the next 20 minutes. Okay, so Falcon is based on the GPV signature framework. It's about 16 years old. GPV stands for Gentry, Piper, 510 of them. It starts with a lattice. Okay, so that's basically it's the usual thing. You start with a sort of a short basis, typically called B. You have a sort of parity check matrix A that sort of checks whether vectors are in the lattice. So sort of essentially the kernel of A, that's your lattice. And we also need the hash function that sort of maps just bit strings messages to lattice points. Okay, so how do you sign a message? You first hash it, and then you find a pre-image, essentially of that hash value under this matrix A, just by standard linear algebra. And I'm normally not a person who multiplies matrices from the right, but the Falcon authors do that. And okay, to make it easier, sort of to put the Falcon specification next to the slides, I thought I'd stick with their idiosyncrasy rather than mine, and also multiply matrices from the right. Okay, so you found this pre-image C of the hash value of the message. Next thing is you do the so-called pre-image sampling. So you find a random lattice vector that is sort of close to that C here. So typically, what's random about this? The lattice is sort of dense enough that there is a bit of a choice. You have several lattice vectors which are going to be close to this pre-image, and you just pick one randomly. And this is sort of where the security lies. Yeah, if you say, what does close actually mean? If it's sort of too close, there is not much of a choice. If you relax this, and close could be actually quite far away, then you get into security problems. But okay, that's not really the topic today. The output then is the difference between this pre-image and the lattice vector. Now, because the two are close, if you subtract two close vectors, obviously you get a short vector. So your signature is going to be a short vector. And also when you check it, it's going to map to the message hash under this matrix A transpose. And this is exactly how you verify a signature. You check it's short, and you check it maps to the message hash. Okay, this is how this framework works in general. Why is it secure? Because we believe that it's hard to find this close vector on the lattice that's close to the pre-image if you don't have a short basis. So short basis is your secret key. It allows you to do this, to find this vector that's close to the pre-image. Okay, if you don't have the short basis, you can't do that. Well, that's what we believe anyway. Okay. Now I get to the point why this message hashing is typically randomized. So I've repeated just sort of for ease of reference the signing procedure at the top of the slide. Now suppose we sign the same message twice. So we do this sort of sampling twice. Then of course we get two different signatures because it's sort of a random sampling process. Assume you have the same message hash, then yeah, we get two sort of signatures which are close to that pre-image. They're both close. If I subtract them, I get another short vector. So that's obviously what shouldn't happen. Yeah, I get a short lattice vector, not good. Yeah, generally we assume security relies on the attacker not having short lattice vectors. So in that case, I sign twice, I get two different signatures. I subtract them, I get a short lattice vector. Shouldn't happen. So what do we do about this? I mean, that's obviously been pointed out in the original GPV paper already. There are various ways you can prevent that. The standard Falcon strategy to prevent that is to randomize the message hash, as I said. So you sign once, you get some message hash. You do this pre-image sampling. You sign the same message again. Because of the randomization, you're going to get a different pre-image, another vector close to that. But because it's a kind of a completely different pre-image, the two signatures are not going to be close. So if you subtract them, you're not going to get a short vector. fine, everything's okay. Deterministic Falcon solves the problem in a different way. You just make sure that the sampling process is deterministic. So if you sign the same message twice, you're going to get exactly the same signature. So no problem again. If the attacker subtracts two signatures, they're the same, difference is 0, no problem. So those are the two strategies. You either randomize the hash, then the attacker, if the attacker subtracts the signatures, the attacker gets a long vector, that's okay. Or you make sure everything's deterministic. Then if an attacker subtracts the signatures of the same message, the result is 0. It doesn't help the attacker either. So what is the idea now? How can we attack this with a fault attack? We sign the same message repeatedly with deterministic Falcon. And we're going to inject a fault in this sampling process. Then we get exactly this effect. We have the same message hash. We get different signatures, valid signatures actually. And if we subtract 2, they're going to be close to each other. So we're going to get a short vector if we subtract 2 signatures. And we can do that repeatedly, and then we get loads of short vectors in this lattice, and we can do lattice reduction, the usual game, and if we're lucky, we find a short basis for that. Okay, so that's the strategy. So another ingredient we're going to need, and we have to look sort of into the details of Falcon now to see how this works. Falcon is based on entral lattices, so that's a special type of lattice. Just repeating the setup here to do fixed notation. So you have the prime number, it's a lattice defined in terms of polynomials, essentially a polynomial ring. So you just take Zx, you divide out a certain polynomial, and your lattice is going to be generated by these 4 polynomials, small f, small g, capital F, capital G, and they satisfy a certain equation. It's just technical. The public key is going to be G over F, G divided by F basically, and it's typically large. So don't worry about the details, it's technical. Another thing we're going to need, I spoke about polynomials. Of course, lattices, you think of integer coordinates, so you have to translate the two. Obviously, you can view a polynomial as a vector of integers, easy. But you can also multiply 2 polynomials, and then you can view that as a sort of a matrix multiplied with a vector. So if you have 2 polynomials, A and B, you multiply them. You can view A as the vector and B as a matrix, because polynomial multiplication is linear, you're going to get a linear map, and the matrix and the polynomial coefficients are connected like that on the side. If you're bored tonight, you can check that I got this right. Okay, if you do that identification, then you can actually write an entry lattice like this. So it's the lattice generated by these 4 polynomials, G minus F, capital G minus capital F. And equivalently, it's the sort of the parity check matrix is given by the public key. Again, homework, if you're bored tonight in the hotel room, check this. So how does signing work with Falcon? This is the signing procedure. Okay, you're hashing arrow here actually. Okay. Yeah. Yes, works perfect. So you hash the message, and the interesting thing is you have this procedure called FF sampling. FF stands for fast Fourier. This is this infamous floating point arithmetic inside Falcon. We're not going to go into this. This is not a Falcon introductory talk here, so I'm just going to accept this. So FF sampling, this is the procedure where the sampling is happening, where you actually say, okay, I want a lattice vector close to the pre-image of the message hash. So we want to inject a fault into this subroutine. We see we sort of get 2 kind of coordinates to two polynomials out called Z0, Z1. Well, obviously, B is a sort of a 2x2 matrix. At least you look, think of it in terms of polynomials. The exact details, how you sort of inject the fault to make only Z0 wrong, that's in the paper. That's, again, quite technical, but roughly goes like this. Falcon's sampling procedure is defined recursively. So this function ff sampling sort of calls itself twice with sort of half the size, and you sort of trickle down until you have to sample only a single polynomial coefficient at the bottom. So you sort of get this tree structure, and if you inject a fault somewhere in the right branch of the right half of the tree, that's only going to affect the coefficient of the polynomial Z0, not Z1. And also, if you sort of, the further you go to the right, sort of the smaller the changes. Yeah? If you inject a fault fairly early on and you upset the sampler, the pseudo RNG, this is going to affect all the following coefficients, so you get something that's very wrong. So you have a bit of control over sort of how different that Z0 is. Okay, so I want to inject a fault in the right half of the tree. Okay. So this is essentially one line out of the signature generation. So when you sign, you're going to do this vector matrix multiplication there. If we only look at the second component, again, there's a sort of a notational inconsistency here, which I've inherited from the Falcon specification. So don't blame me. It's S1, S2, otherwise indices are 0 and 1, but that's what the Falcon specification does, so it's not my fault. Okay, so if you look at that equation, you find that S2 is just this Z0, which we sampled, minus some T1, which we've calculated before, times this little f. Little f is part of the private key, plus the multiple of capital F. Capital F is also part of the private key. Now, what happens if we sign twice and we inject a fault the second time? We get a second signature, S1 prime, S2 prime. We sort of subtract the two signatures from each other, particularly the second component, that's what we're interested in. If you do that, you see that S2 minus S2 prime is just some polynomial times little f, and little f is part of the private key, as we said. So if you do that repeatedly, you're going to get, oh no, it's a scale, it's not very long. You're going to get sort of multiples of little f, yeah? You do this repeatedly, you always get some Z0 minus Z0 prime times f, and then you get sort of a set of kind of some small polynomial times f, loads of those. And all those vectors there, they live in that lattice that you use. So what do you do with all those vectors? You do lattice reduction. Because this sort of these vectors we get from the fault injection, the faulty signatures, they're going to generate a lattice which is actually a sublattice of the lattice we're working in. And if you do lattice reduction, and if we're lucky, we might just get this little f. Yeah? So sort of delta 1 times little f, delta 2 times little f, and so on and so on. We do lattice reduction. If we're lucky, we get little f. So there are a few kind of trade-offs in there. Yeah, it could be that we don't get little f exactly. We might get a sort of a multiple of it. If we're not so lucky, then we just have to try again. But generally works rather well. And little f is actually sufficient. You can calculate the whole rest of the public key. You can calculate capital F and so on from that. So when you've got little f as the attacker, you've won. You've broken it. So how can we be sure this actually works as lattice reduction? I mean, obviously, sort of the lattice is too large, doesn't work. So yeah, there's a bit of a trade-off here. Sort of the more kind of vectors we get, the bigger the lattice the attacker gets from that, the bigger the chance, obviously, that it contains little f. On the other hand, if the lattice is smaller, has a lower dimension, it's sort of easier to reduce. So what we found is that if you inject the force sort of towards the end of the sampling procedure, you actually have a better chance you get a lattice that is sort of just the right size. So we found that go into the final sort of cause of the pseudo-random number generator that actually does the deterministic sampling for you. There are kind of two types of faults. Can I go back here? Let's see. Okay. So if you look at this sampling again, this tree structure, obviously somewhere at the bottom of this tree, which is sampling a single coefficient, that means we sort of call it pseudo-random number generator. If you inject a fault into that, there are two things that can happen. You can either upset the internal state, the seed, which means all following outputs are going to be wrong from that point in time, or you just sort of upset the single output. These are the two things that can happen. And obviously, if you could upset the internal state and all future output is wrong, then if you sort of hit it early on, then you get something that's sort of completely different, and you're going to get a sort of a larger lattice, and that is potentially problematic. Where were we? Okay. Yes, so yeah, so we found that if you sort of direct a fault to one of the final 5 PRNG calls, then sort of have a fairly good chance of this attack working. So the nice thing about this is basically you can use almost any fault model you like. All you have to do is somehow upset the pseudo RNG that outputs the coefficient. It doesn't matter if we do this with an instruction skip, a data fault, or whatever. We don't care. As long as the output of the PRNG is somehow wrong, it's okay, it will do. Yeah. So no kind of type restrictions required there. In case the lattice reduction doesn't work, you can try to combine this with exhaustive search. So the lattice reduction is going to, if it doesn't give you little f, it gives you little f times some presumably small polynomial, and you can just try to find that small polynomial. So if you're lucky, it only has sort of 1 non-zero coefficient, it might have 2 non-zero coefficients, and you can find those with the exhaustive search. And then there's sort of, it's a trade-off. Yeah, you can decide how much time you want to invest in exhaustive search. What I should also mention, F and sort of all rotations of F are equivalent. It's kind of, yeah, from lattice structure to sort of the lattice of the symmetry. So let's actually have a look at some real code. So we're going deeper and deeper. We started looking at the GPV framework on an abstract level, and we looked at the algorithm specification, and now we're going to actually look at Cortex M4 code to kind of verify this actually works. So this is code from deep inside the pseudo RNG that does the sampling, the coefficient sampling in the deterministic Falcon variant. And when you look at that, just pull out a few instructions. For example, if you just change that in that instruction, whatever that is, it's going to work. We simulated this. We let Falcon run on a Cortex M4. We just instrumented it with GDB, and with about 140 signatures, we could recover the key. So more details in the paper. I've done extensive experiments to also assess the success probability. This is just one example. So we've done 50 faults against Falcon 512. We simulated this on a PC just to sort of get a feeling for how many faults do we need and how big is the exhaustive search effort. The faults we simulated here affected the state of the PRNG, so it's not just one coefficient, it's all coefficients from that point on after the fault which are wrong. And the statistics of this is the W tells you something about the remaining exhaustive search effort. So if W is 1, that means no exhaustive search effort is effectively, and we have to find 2 non-zero coefficients somewhere. Okay, it's a bit bigger. And the upshot is the attack is quite successful. They're always somewhere in the sort of 90% plus area if you combine it with exhaustive search, and even without exhaustive search, okay, if you choose a sort of good point, you can somewhere 60-70% success rate. And so if it doesn't work, just try again, basically, or generate more faults. So what can you do about this? The answer is not very much, unfortunately. The point is to notice all 40 signatures are valid. They verify. Yeah, you just upset the pre-image sampler, but you still get a valid pre-image sample. You still get a lattice point. Everything's fine. You can verify the signatures. You kind of can't really recognize that from the outside that anything's gone wrong. Of course, you can just do the usual thing, sign twice, compare the 2 signatures. Bit lame as a countermeasure in any sense of the word. Not just boring, also kind of quite expensive, of course. Yeah, doubles the effort. Then there's the usual game. What if the attacker injects the same fault twice? It's not going to work. Slightly more intelligent, you could calculate a checksum over the PRNG output, then sort of wind the PRNG back, run it again to produce the same output, recalculate the checksum, compare. So to summarize, we've seen a fault attack against the deterministic variant of Falcon. It's requires only a very liberal fault model. As we saw, any fault in the PRNG will work, whether you do that with an instruction skip, with a data, some sort of randomizing of data, it doesn't matter. So you have a fairly good chance of this attack working on whichever platform you target. There's a fairly high success rate. We've seen that. Yeah, you can also combine it with exhaustive search. So there's a bit of a trade-off between sort of immediate success and exhaustive search effort. Of course, it would be interesting to transfer this to other GPV-based signatures. There are sort of further kind of developments of Falcon. There is something called Mitaka, there's Mod Falcon, and so on. Quite a few things out there. Of course, it doesn't apply to standard Falcon, the attack. Standard Falcon is randomized, so you would have to kind of, if you want to apply to standard Falcon, you need 2 faults. Yeah, one to make standard Falcon deterministic to somehow knock out the entropy source, and then second fault for the attack. So it might be interesting to look at that as well. And I guess that's it. Any questions?
We have time for questions. Yes, Patrick.
I have one question on the countermeasure step that you were talking about in the previous slide. Do you think that some control flow integrity might be a good countermeasure against the instruction skips and so on? So you verify the signature of a basic block, and then you guarantee that the instruction was not skipped or not corrupted and so on.
It would certainly help. Yes, it will of course prevent the instruction skip, but as I said, you don't have to do an instruction skip if you can change data read from memory, for example. If you can attack the memory interface, if you can change data and registers, would also work.
A combination of countermeasures, something in data flow, and how will be the cost? No idea.
You'd have to ask a hardware designer. Yeah, it's obviously if you have super secure hardware, then it's super secure, it's okay. But yeah, it's I guess a bit out of scope for me at least.
Thanks.
Yes. Yes.
I go ahead.
Yeah.
So when you vector, like collect many small delta times f.
Yep.
And depending where you insert 4 to get a different kind of delta. So I was wondering whether you have like, is there a way to write I mean any particular factor of distribution of the small delta depending on where you inject the 4 in that tree and with the
yes. As I said, okay, so the sampling in the end goes down to where you sample single coefficients of a polynomial. All those coefficients fall out of the same pseudo RNG. As I said, if you inject a fault into the internal state of that pseudo RNG fairly early on, like very much to the left of the tree, then all future outputs are going to be wrong. So you get deltas with a lot of non-zero coefficients. And you're going to get a sort of bigger lattice.
And do you know their location? Or
you could probably work it out, yeah. But we didn't go into that. We just went as far as thinking, okay, we're probably better off injecting faults towards the end, and just went 5 rounds back, looked at the final 5 rounds that worked, and being pragmatic people from industry, we were happy with that. It works, so we stopped.
like you can let's say you take just the last coefficient. Because if you just end up having one non-zero coefficient in the delta, you get one integer, you get f, no, without any latitude. Let's say we can do that.
Yeah, but okay, I mean the lattice can also be a bit too small, but okay, yeah.
Yes.
Does recovery of this small f translate to the full recovery or significant?
Yes, it's sufficient. If you have the small f, you can calculate the whole private key from that with the public key, because yeah. So if you look at the last line from small f with the public key, you get small g, and capital F, capital G are connected to small f and small g with the equation in the middle of the slide. So you can just use that relation, you get the whole key. Up to rotation of the polynomials, but that doesn't matter. All rotated keys are equivalent.
Yes, yes.
One last question. You mentioned that by comparing the systems, it will be a Kelvin measure. Will it be also linear to other tests?
Yes, that is one idea that yeah, to avoid signing twice, running the whole signature procedure twice, you just run the PRNG twice. It's probably not 100%. You could still imagine that faults happen in the sort of the propagation of the PRNG output. So it wouldn't cover everything, but it would cover a large part. It would reduce the attack surface bit, yeah. But it's probably not 100% secure. Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, any other questions? Actually, I had a question. At some point of time, you showed a slide where you collect a set with many multiples of f.
Yeah.
I was wondering, can you take GCD in this ring? Can you just compute the GCD of that set and compute the
No. Maybe it is a lattice. And we need something more complicated for lattice reduction than GCD computation. So it's essentially, yeah, you have to find it. No, but you would still, no. Yeah, we would still get, not even sure, GCP wouldn't really make sense in that ring, I think.
Okay. If there are no other questions, then let's thank the speaker again. You know, going to the last talk of the session. It's called fault attack sensitivity of public parameters in dilithium verification. The others are Anderson Caivera, Alexander Borzetti, and Karim Hasman. And his son, what's his name?
Anderson.
Anderson's son.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. So today I'll be presenting the fault sensitivity analysis we did on the Dilithium verification algorithm. And because today I have the difficult task to entertain you just before the lunch break, I'll try to make it quick. So after a brief introduction around the context of this work, as well as the presentation of the algorithm we studied and the fault models we considered, I will present you the main idea behind the analysis we did. And at the end, I will conclude with a brief discussion around countermeasures. Okay, so with more and more powerful quantum computers, we could implement Shor's algorithm that can break standard digital signatures algorithm used today. And so there has been a lot of research in order to find new signature algorithms resistant to quantum computers. And to this regard, the National Institute of Standards and Technology has released back in August their first draft of specification for MLDSA, which is a quantum resistant signature algorithm based on Dilithium. And so once this standard will be finalized, it will need to be implemented in a variety of use cases to protect the integrity of data, such as the verification of games in consoles, secure boot of devices, or even more global concepts such as IoT or even PKI. And so it will need to be implemented securely. And while there has been a lot of research on the signature side of Dilithium, there has been less on the verification one. And because it is usually considered that the public parameters are less important to protect, with this work, we wanted to see if it was also the case for Dilithium or not. But first, what's Dilithium? So it's a public key signature algorithm based on two hard problems on structured lattices, MLWE, and MSIS. But here, the most important part is to know that there are no efficient algorithms, either classical or quantum, that can solve these two problems in less than exponential time. So that's what makes them interesting. So Dilithium has three different security levels, as well as two different versions, one deterministic and one randomized. And so with these schemes, we will be working with this ring here, where elements are polynomial of degree less than n here, which is equal to 256, and where coefficients are taken modulo this prime number q here that fits in 23 bits. And so most of the time we will be working with vectors of polynomials of either size k or l, which are public parameters, depending on the security level of Dilithium. And for efficiency reasons, the polynomial multiplication is done using the number theoretic transform, which is just a version of the fast Fourier transform for a finite field. And so this allows, after conversion, to do the polynomial multiplication coefficient-wise. So now I won't go too much into details of the three different algorithms, but if you want more details, you can come and see me tomorrow at the PhD forum. But here for the key generation algorithm, what's important to know is that we first sample a public matrix A of k times L polynomials. Then we sample two small secrets S1 and S2, which are also vectors of polynomials. And we then compute the learning with error sample T here on line 3. And for efficiency reasons, we will split this vector into its upper and lower part, T1 and T0. And so the public key will be the public matrix A together with the upper part of T1, and the secret key will essentially be the two small secrets S1 and S2, and the lower part of T0. And so as I said earlier, and as we can see here, we will be working with vectors of polynomials. And if we take, for example, the vector T here, that has k different polynomials, so in the various implementation, this is usually represented as a structure or as a list, where each of the rows here represent the polynomials, and inside them we have the 256 coefficients. So operations which are done coefficient-wise, such as the addition, the subtraction, the rounding, the decomposition, or the multiplication in the entity domain, we'll first have to iterate through the different polynomials, and then we will have to iterate through the 256 coefficients. So it's a very iterative process. So now for the signature algorithm, it's based on the Fiat-Shamir with the Borch principle, but again, what's important to know here is that we first sample some random vector y in some interval. We multiply it by the matrix A and get its upper part W1. And so this will be used into a hash function with some information about the public key and the message to compute this challenge polynomial C. And so this challenge will be returned by the signature at the end, and is also used to compute this response vector Z here. And if this vector is under some security range, we will also return it with the signature at the end. Then after another check for correctness and security purpose, so here on the signature algorithm, we don't have access to the entirety of the T vector, but only on the T0 part that we cannot see here, but just on the T0 part. So we will need to compute a hint vector H that will be needed on the verification part to compensate for this loss of information. And so once all the conditions line 9 and 12 are verified, we can return the signature. Now, the main idea behind the verification algorithm here will be that we will need to compute a possible W1 vector, but with only public information. And so this works because if we take this first line here, and if we expand the vector Z and T1 times 2 to the power of D, then we have this equation here. And because of how the values were sampled and bounded in the signature algorithm, then we can use a lemma from the specification that tells us that this first line will be equal to the high bits of W minus C times S2. So in other words, the vector H allows us to compensate for the addition of C times T0. And so again, because of how the values were sampled and bounded in the signature algorithm, we can use another lemma from the specification that tells us that this will indeed be equal to the high bits of W. In other words, the subtraction by C times S2 will only affect the low bits of W, and so we will have the same W1 vector. And then, if the vector Z is in the correct security range, if we sample the same challenge C because we had the same W1 vector, and if the number of hints in the hint vector of H are bounded, then we can accept this signature as valid, otherwise we don't. So now, because we had a nice presentation about faults earlier, I won't go too much into details here, but what's important to know is that fault attacks on signature algorithms can be used in order to retrieve some secret information, just as in the previous talk. But they can also be used on the verification algorithm to make accept false signatures. And so that's the use case here. And so faults can be injected through different means: clock, voltage glitches, electromagnetic, light, laser pulses, or even with heat. And so these fault injections will propagate through different means at the hardware level. And so this will have several observations at the software side. And then an attacker can observe or not the effects of the faults. And so in our work, we decided to consider two different levels of abstraction by mainly considering observation in the instruction flow with skipping and test inversion faults, and also by considering fault observation on data with zeroizing and randomization faults. And so in our work, we didn't consider the specific type of faults to inject in order to have these 4 different types of observations, but rather we consider the type and number of observations needed to have the desired effect. And so now if we suppose that an attacker has the capability to have these 4 different types of observations, we can go to the analysis we did on the verification algorithm. So here, remember that the main idea will be to make accept false signatures with the help of false. And so usually in the verification algorithms of signatures, it is the last verification checks that are usually targeted, but because they are the prime target to false, they are also usually protected and securized. But anyway, here in Dilithium, we have 3 different checks. So this will roughly mean that we will need to inject a minimum of 3 faults, let's say. And if we look, okay, and so here the question was, is there other locations that could potentially require less faults to inject and that could also potentially target public parameters that are not protected usually? And so if we look at the 3 different checks, so here the first one was on the vector z and its range. So here, if we want to pass this check without fault, we could, for example, already sample a vector z under the correct security range. Then the second check on the challenge polynomial is trickier to do because we will need to compute the same challenge C. But because the public key is no, and the message is also a public information, so this is only a condition on W1. And we can rewrite this equation like that. So we will need that the high bits on the left will be equal to the high bits on the right. And so for this, we can somehow make sure that the vector c times t1 times 2 to the power of d will not affect too much the high bits of AZ. And then lastly, for the check on the number of ones in the hint vector h here, we can compute such a vector if necessary and accordingly. And so in our paper, we summarize this with proposition number 1, where we basically say the same thing, but with mathematical notations. So if we take, for example, a vector z already in the correct security range, then we have identified 3 different conditions that, if met, can assure that the high bits of AZ minus C times T1 times 2 to the power of D will be equal to the high bits of AZ. So the first one is very easy. It's if this vector is equal to 0. So then it's quite straightforward because the subtraction will have no effect at all. And so the high bits will remain the same. Then the second condition is if we were able to bound this vector by some quantity beta here, that is in the order of 2 to the power of 8, 2 to the power of 8, depending on the security level of dilithium. And if we have the second condition there, we can still assure that the high bits will remain the same. And then lastly, if we didn't have this very restrictive bound, but a looser one, so here gamma 2 is in the order of 2 to the power 17, 2 to the power 18, depending on the security level of dilithium, then we can still compute a hint vector h that can be used in order to retrieve the correct high bits. But the problem is that actually in the verification algorithm of dilithium, this vector is too big to use any of the 3 conditions from proposition 1. But this is where we can make use of faults, because the idea will be to determine if there is sensitive locations where we could potentially inject some faults in order to fall in either of the 3 conditions from proposition 1. So now let's see if it's possible to do such a thing by looking at the first line from the verification algorithm. And so here, remember that the idea will be to make the right part of the subtraction as small as possible in order to use one of the 3 conditions from proposition 1. So here, for example, we could zeroize all the coefficients from the challenge polynomial C, and so the right part of the subtraction will be equal to 0, and we will be able to use condition 1 from proposition 1. But then another target can be the exponent d here, that is known and the same for all versions of dilithium. So we could potentially target it, lower its value, and so we will lower the value of the right part of the subtraction here. And so there we could use condition 3 from proposition 1. And lastly, if in the subtraction the result is stored in the same location as in the left part, then we could skip altogether the subtraction, and we will be able to use also condition 1 from proposition 1. So this seems rather easy here. Well, in practice, I have bad news. It can be more challenging to do. And if we look at an implementation from the verification algorithm, so here it's the one from the PQClean library, we can see that first, there is a lot more code to it. And secondly, because the polyvec functions here I don't know if you can see them, like for example, line 28, 31, and so on, will work on vectors of polynomial. They will in turn make call to functions that work on polynomial, and even sometimes they can make also call to functions that work on coefficients. But if we get rid of all the unnecessary lines and just keep what's interesting to us, then we can actually make the same analysis as in the algorithmic view. And so the challenge C will be sampled here, line 27. And so in our paper, we have identified a sensitive for loop inside it that can be targeted through skipping, test inversion, and zeroizing faults in order to use condition 1 from proposition 1. Then the multiplication by 2 to the power of d is done line 32 here, where again in our paper we have identified sensitive location to skipping and zeroizing faults that allows us to use condition 3 of proposition number 1. And lastly, remember the subtraction could also be targeted if the result was stored in the left part of the subtraction. Well, in practice, this is done in all the public implementation of Dilithium. And so we could also target this location here, line 35, where we have identified several sensitive locations to skipping faults. And we could still also use condition 1 for proposition 1. So in our paper, for every of the two conditions that we use, we have identified an algorithm that can be used in order to craft Dilithium signatures that, when paired with the specific type of faults, can be accepted by the verification algorithm. And so we have verified that this was indeed the case by crafting such signatures and sending them to a modified version of Dilithium in Python with either the subtraction skip, the polynomial C zeroized, or the exponent D modified. And so we have verified that it indeed worked. But for a real device, for a real platform, you will need first to determine which type of photo observation you can have. So then with this, you will be able to determine which of the 3 different scenarios you will be able to use. And so here, let's say that I am able to inject some fault that will result in the skipping of some function call. So I could potentially use that in scenario number 3 to skip the call to the subtraction function. And so then what's left to do is only to craft my specific signature. So I will first sample my vector z already in the correct security range. I will sample my hint vector h already with the correct number of ones in it. And I can use those 2 pieces of information in order to compute my W1 vector that will be needed to compute my challenge polynomial C. And I can return this as my signature to the device that will perform the verification. And so he will compute the first line here like this. And because I am able to inject some fault that will result in the skipping of the subtraction, then we can see that the same W1 vector will be computed as in my crafted signature. And so then, because the vector z is already in the correct security range, because I was able to sample the same challenge C because I have the same W1 vector, and because the number of ones in the hint vector h are already bounded, then this particular type of signature will be verified. So now for countermeasures, first, you have to make sure that the result of the subtraction will not be stored in the same location as the left part. So this is rather easy and has no overcost. Then we can see that all the 3 different conditions from proposition 1 are based on the idea to make C times T1 times 2 to the power of D smaller than it actually is. So the idea here will be to make sure that it's not as small. And so at the end of our paper, we showed this with this nice table where for each of the 3 different scenarios, we summarize the sensitive location to the 4 different types of observations, and together with the countermeasures that can be used to secure them. So now just to sum up quickly, in practice, you have to make sure that the vector C times T1 times 2 to the power of D is not smaller than it is to me. Otherwise, there can be false signatures that can be verified with the help of faults. But in our paper, we also show simple countermeasures that can be used in order to make the verification algorithm of Dilithium intrinsically resistant to proposition number 1. But there are still open questions because we haven't quite figured if we are able to use condition 2 from proposition 1.
And because we don't have a full sensitivity analysis, maybe there could be also other sensitive location to one of the three conditions from proposition 1. And lastly, now we have to see how this behaves in practice with real faults and how also the countermeasures behave in practice. So thank you very much, and I take questions now. Thank you.
Yes, we have lots of time. Are there any questions? Yes, first you.
I have a quick question. You talk about proposition number 1.
Yes.
You have already proposition number 2 or 3 or?
No, it's just proposition number 1 on the paper. Okay. But maybe for future work.
So you didn't try the attack on a real device?
No, not yet.
Okay.
So that's maybe for future work also to see how it behaves, for example, on a chip whisper, because it's very easy to do faults on it.
But from your knowledge of Thales products, will you say which one of the injection is the easiest?
I don't know if I can comment on that, but
so, yes.
So for CT, so for faulting D, I know that in some of the subroutines, there's like a different algorithm for different D.
For the exponent, you mean?
Yeah, is that is the one where you're suggesting faulting like typically implemented where it's actually a parameter to the function in practice that you could fault it, or is it like in some cases it's a constant, or even the for loop is slightly different for different D?
Sorry, I don't know if I've understood your questions right, but for example, if we take here, you mean this part here?
Yeah, that's done with an actual parameter to.
Yes, it's hard coded on the code. It's fixed as a, it's 13 in practice, so it has not very too much bits in it. We could, for example, zeroize only 1 bit, and in our paper we show that this can be used in order to craft specific signatures.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, let us thank all the speakers of the session again. This the session ends, and we have lunch in about 20 minutes.
Yes. So yes, indeed, lunch is in the building next door called Matrix 1. I will walk in that direction. Feel free to follow me. And it starts at 1:30.
Okay, it's time to start the second session, the last of the day, dedicated to such attacks. So the first talk is called Attacking at Non-Harmonic Frequencies in Streaming Channel Attacks. And the authors are Jérémy Guillaume, Maxime Pelka, Amor Nefka, and Ruben Salvador. And the speaker will be Jeremy.
So, hello everyone. My name is Jérémy. I'm working at the AEAD laboratory in Rennes in France. And in this presentation, I will present my work on the screaming channel attacks, and more specifically, how we handle one of its limitations. So first, I will present you what is the screaming channel attack, then what is the limitations that we want to deal with, the solution we propose for this, and the impact it has on the attack. So the screaming channel attack is just a specific case of side channel attack. Side channel attack in which what we want to do is to recover secret data from a victim by analyzing the leakage the victim produces. And a frequent scenario of side channel attack, which will be the scenario we will be working on in context of our work, will be cryptographic side channel attack, where the secret data that we want to recover is a secret key used by cryptographic process. And we recover this by analyzing the leakage produced by the victim while it computes the cryptographic processes. And once we have the secret key, we can decipher all the ciphertext and recover all the secret data. And screaming channel attacks are side channel attacks, but that happen on mixed signal devices where the analog part integrates a radio frequency module. The radio frequency module transmits a legitimate signal, in the context of our work, the legitimate signal will be a Bluetooth signal transmitted at 2.4 GHz, but it's just an example. We could imagine the same attack using another signal at another frequency. And the digital part is going to run some processes like the cryptographic process. And why it does that? It will create noise, the same noise that we use in conventional side-channel attack. But here, the noise is going to disturb the analog part, and more specifically, the radio frequency module. And the radio frequency module is going to involuntarily modulate, amplify, and transmit the noise, making the noise appearing aside of the legitimate signal at a frequency equal to the frequency of the legitimate signal plus the frequency of the noise, which is around the clock frequency. And usually in conventional side-channel attack, we need to be very close to the device in order to collect the leakage that we use to perform the side-channel attack. But here, an attacker can collect the noise at a distance. And this attack has been demonstrated at a distance up to 15 meters. So I told you that the leakage is present as the frequency of the legitimate signal plus the frequency of the digital clock, but actually it is present at every harmonic of the digital clock, making the leakage appearing not at one frequency, but at multiple one. And in every previous work on screaming channel attacks, they use the second one, because the first harmonic is often polluted by other signal, like a Wi-Fi signal, for example. And the further we go in frequencies, the lower is the leakage. So the most optimal one was most often the second one. And when we wanted to reproduce the screaming channel attack in our lab, we had to use the third one. Why? Because in our lab, even the second one was polluted too. And the fourth one was too weak to success in the attack. So we used the third one. But from there came one question: what happens if we want to success in the attack in an environment where all the harmonics are polluted? Does this make the attack impossible, or could we try to use other frequency than the harmonic to success in the attack? Because previous study on mixed signal devices demonstrated that when the digital part creates a noise at a given frequency, let's say 10 MHz, for example, the noise will go through the substrate, and the substrate will act as a filter which will spread the noise over a wider range of frequency, making the noise appearing at other frequencies than only the initial harmonics. And when we look at the output of the radio frequency module of our victim, we can clearly see here the peaks that correspond to the legitimate signal at 2.4 GHz. We can clearly see the 4 peaks that correspond to the 4 first harmonic, but you see there is also energy between the harmonic. So we can highly suppose that this phenomenon of the noise being spread over a wider range of frequency also happened against our victim. But from this, we have two questions. First, can we demonstrate, can we prove that the leakage is also present at other frequencies than just the harmonic? And second, if we demonstrate that the leakage is also present at other harmonics than other frequencies than the harmonic, how difficult is the attack there? Is it much more difficult to attack by using non-harmonic frequencies than harmonic or not? So to answer the first question and evaluate the presence of the leakage over the spectrum, what we propose to do is to perform multiple t-tests to evaluate its presence. So what we're going to do, we're going to evaluate a range of the spectrum going from 1.4 GHz to 3.4 GHz, minus plus 1 GHz around the frequency of the legitimate signal at 2.4 GHz, with a resolution of 1 MHz, meaning that between each frequencies that we're going to test, we'll have 1 MHz. And at each tested frequency, we're going to perform a t-test. So for this, first we will extract a pattern, meaning that we're going to extract the shape of the leakage produced by the victim each time it computes a cryptographic process. And using this pattern, we're going to do a pattern recognition to collect 500 synchronized traces that we'll use for the t-test. And the t-test that we perform at each frequency is a fixed versus fixed t-test, meaning that we have two groups of traces, and in each group, all the traces correspond to the leakage of a cryptographic process using the same data. In one group, all the plaintext were full of 0. On the other one, all the plaintexts are full of 1. And the key is always full of 0. And here is the result of the t-test that we get on the range of frequencies that we tested. So for a t-test, we can assume that there is a correlation between the leakage and the data when the result of the t-test is above 4.5, the red line. But what is more interesting for us is to compare the result of the t-test from one frequency to another. So with the blue dotted line, we indicate the position of the theoretical harmonic, where the leakage should be the highest. And we can see that the result of the t-test is much higher around the two first harmonics in both sides of the spectrum. But what is more interesting to see is that even between the harmonic, the result of the t-test is still good. And for example, imagine if the two first harmonic were polluted and unusable, it could be more interesting to search for frequency between these two harmonic rather than going too high with the harmonic higher in frequency. So with this test, we demonstrate that the leakage is also present at other frequencies than the harmonic. The problem of this test is that it takes a lot of time because at each frequency we need to collect 500 traces. And also, we don't know if 500 traces per frequency is enough or not. Maybe if we use much more traces, we could detect other frequency where the leakage is present. But if we increase the number of traces that we collect at each frequency, we considerably increase the time of the experiment. So what we propose to do, we propose to use another method, which will return the same result, but which will reduce the complexity of the experiment. And this method will be the pattern detection. So with the pattern detection, we will remove these steps that we needed for the t-test where we needed to collect a given number of traces. Instead, with pattern detection, we are going to evaluate at each frequency our ability to extract a pattern. For the t-test, we use a method to extract a pattern. Here, we will adapt this method to do pattern detection and evaluate the quality of the patterns that we extract at each frequency. So pattern detection is just an adaptation of the pattern extraction. So I will first present you how we did to extract the pattern in the first place, and then show you how we adapt this method to do pattern detection. To extract the pattern, we use the method called virtual trigger. And to explain the method of the virtual trigger, let's imagine that this line corresponds to the leakage produced by the victim while it computes a series of cryptographic processes. And each segment corresponds to the leakage of one cryptographic process. With virtual trigger, if we assume that we know precisely the time duration of one cryptographic process, then we can segment this trace. We just have to cut it in different segments having this precise length. And then we get multiple segments that correspond to the same leakage, to the leakage of one cryptographic process. And if we average them together, the average of the noise being around 0, we reduce the noise and we get a trace with reduced noise that we can use as a pattern that we use after for pattern recognition. So in pattern detection, what we do at each frequency where we want to evaluate the presence of the leakage, we extract a raw trace, being the leakage of multiple of a series of cryptographic processes. We segment it with the same concept of virtual trigger. And after that, what we do is we take half of the segment that we average together to get a segment of reference. We do the same with the other half of the segment. And if the leakage is present at this frequency, both segments of reference should correspond to the pattern. And the correlation between the two segments should be high. If we perform the same test at a frequency where the leakage is not present, then the two segments of reference that we will get will be only random noise. And the correlation between the two will be very low. So when we perform this test on the same range of frequency as we did for the t-test, here is the result that we get. We can see that here again, the result is in terms of correlation between the two segments of reference. And we can see that the result is good around the first harmonics. And to make sure that this high correlation is good because of the presence of the leakage of the cryptographic process, we perform the same test, but with the victim not realizing any cryptographic process. And we got the red curve. And the highest correlation we can get in this situation is around 75%. So what we can say is if the correlation is below 75%, we cannot guarantee that it is because of the presence of the leakage. So we can compare the two results, or the result using the two methods, above the result with the t-test and below the result with the pattern detection. We put in green all the frequency where we detected the presence of the leakage. So for the t-test, it is when the result is above 4.5, and for the pattern detection when the correlation is above 75%. And we can see that both methods return almost the same results. But with pattern detection, we needed less than 1 hour to perform the experiment where it was more than 1 day for the t-test. So now that we demonstrated that the leakage is also present at non-harmonic frequency, now what we want to do is to evaluate the potential of the attack at these non-harmonic frequencies. So what we're going to do, we're going to choose one band of frequency where both methods indicated the presence of the leakage, and we are going to try the attack there. So first, we will perform attack in very idealistic condition, just to see if the attack works or not. And after this, we will add difficulty to go in more realistic condition. So for the attack, we attack between 2.45 GHz to 2.6 GHz. At each frequency, we perform a template attack. We use 15,000 traces for the profiling phase and the same number of traces for the attacking phase. And the result is given in terms of key rank, meaning what is the rank of the correct key among all the possibilities on the key. And we highlight in green all the frequency where the rank of the key was above 2 power 32, meaning that with our computer, we could brute force the key in less than 5 minutes. The ones that I highlighted in blue are the ones that we could brute force in less than 1 hour, and all the other in red. So for this first experiment, we attack by connecting the victim and the attacker by cable to avoid any pollution in the environment. It's very idealistic conditions. And what we can see is that the attack is also possible at non-harmonic frequency. Yes, because in this band, we also have 3 harmonic that we indicate with the red triangle. This corresponds to harmonic frequency, and we can see that the non-harmonic success as well as the harmonic frequencies. So now we're going to increase the difficulty, and we will add a distance between the victim and the attacker. We are going to attack at 2 meters using a directional antenna. And here we lose the first harmonic. The first harmonic is too polluted by other signal, so we do not success the attack there, and also for the non-harmonics that are around it. But for the non-harmonics that are polluted, the attack still works. Now we're going to increase again the difficulty. We will attack at 7 meters. We'll reduce the number of traces used for the attacking phase to 750 traces. And at each frequency, we perform 50 attacks. This is why we reduce the number of frequencies at which we try the attack. We keep only the 3 harmonics and the non-harmonics that perform at best in previous experiments. And we can see that here we lose also the second harmonics, which is less polluted than the first one, but at 7 meters, it is too polluted to success the attack. And in our environment, we can see that we know that the third one is not polluted, so the attack still works there. But if it were polluted, we can see that the attack could remain possible by finding non-harmonics frequencies that are not polluted and where the attack performs as best as these harmonics. So it's not more difficult to attack at non-harmonic than at harmonics. And so with this work, we demonstrated that the leakage is also present, is not only present at harmonic frequency, but also at non-harmonic. And we did this using 2 methods. One that is based on a method that is commonly accepted in the stationary community, the t-test. And we proposed another method, pattern detection, to reduce the complexity to evaluate the presence of the leakage over the spectrum. We also demonstrated that in the context of our work, it is not more complicated to attack at non-harmonic than at harmonic. Of course, we cannot demonstrate that it will be the case against any devices, but at least we demonstrate that non-harmonic have to be checked too, because the attack is also possible there. And with this work, we considerably increase the number of potential frequencies where we can perform the attack. So as future work, what we would like to do is to combine multiple frequencies to try to improve the attack, either using less traces or attacking at a further distance or attacking more challenging environments. And that's all for me. Thank you for your attention, and I can answer your question.
Any questions? Yeah, in your experiments, you explain that you take a bandwidth of 1 megahertz and you make a lot of measurements with a 1 megahertz bandwidth. Yes?
Actually, all the frequencies are separated by 1 megahertz, but the bandwidth is less than this. It is half 500 kilohertz.
Okay, and is it because it's a limitation of your USRP, the SDR, the software defined radio module? Could you increase the bandwidth or like play on that or not?
We tried an experiment where we tried the attack with different bandwidths, and actually this one is easier. Why? Because, for example, if imagine you attack there, let's say, you see here you have, imagine you have a larger bandwidth, then it's very short. Here, for example, if you took this to one, there is one that could, you will also get noise. So it's more optimal to have a smaller bandwidth rather than having a too large one. Plus, you know, the shape of the leakage, when we look at the shape of the leakage from one frequency to another, it changes a lot. So yes, we tried multiple one and we took the more optimal one.
Okay, so it's probably it's a better idea to do the way you do that, like repeating the experiment with a small bandwidth, rather than taking bigger bandwidth to save time, but then we will get more noise.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Maybe you can use a bigger bandwidth to find where it's interesting, but then use a small one to maybe to have a quicker decision where which non-harmonic frequency to put.
You mean collecting a wider bandwidth?
You can use big bandwidth, so you don't have to make so many steps, but to have a rough idea where it's at, where it's each, and then only where it seems interesting to have a smaller bandwidth to really check where is your frequency, where you can have leakage.
You mean for the leakage detection to detect where? Sorry, I don't get.
Yeah, exactly. No, you have to have all these frequencies.
Yeah.
In order to find out where you can mount your attack.
Yeah.
So for this step, you can have bigger bandwidth.
The problem, if we have a bigger bandwidth, is we merge. We can also include some frequency where there is only noise. You see what I mean? So it could reduce the efficiency of the attack.
Yeah, if there is a small green band,
A smaller one.
A small green band, here you will miss it because it's surrounded by pink light.
What? No, sorry, I don't. If it was even smaller.
I mean, if you were using bigger bandwidth,
Yeah.
what you said is like, okay, if there is too many noisy bands,
Yeah.
then not see that there is one effective band that you could use.
Ah, yes, yes.
So, yeah, it has to go back.
Yeah. Other questions?
I have one. This graph, the bandwidth where you have leakage and the one that you are too noisy, depend on your environment, only on the device, on both?
It depends on the environment, of course. For example, yes, here it depends on the environment, but even here it depends also on, it can depend on the SDR, for example. So here the idea was not to list all the frequency where the attack is possible. It was just to evaluate if it is possible or not. We didn't put a lot of effort, for example, at this frequency. Probably if we put much more effort, we could success the attack. I know that around this frequency, it is because of the SDR, for example.
Okay. No questions? One question. Your analysis, such an analysis needs metadata, right? Like plain text or ciphertext. How the attacker, which is 7 meters far from the device, can manage to know the plain text that is needed to mount the analysis?
Actually, here we use the plain text because we attack at the first round of the AES, but we could use the same attack using the ciphertext. And the ciphertext, we assume that it is public because if you encrypt it to transmit it via internet, for example, so the same attack could be possible using the last round of AES by using the ciphertext. Because in my attack, we do not use the plaintext and the ciphertext, we use only the one of them. For me, it was the plaintext, but we could do the same with ciphertext.
Okay. Okay, is there no other question? Let's thank the. Okay. But to remove the bar. Great, thank you. Yes, so the next talk is called Bernoulli, the root of horizontal side channel attacks. And the authors are Gauthier Claire, Sébastien Ordas, and Philippe Morin. And Gauthier is the speaker.
Thank you. So, hello everybody. So I'm Gauthier, and I will be presenting our work for the point of interest selection in the context of horizontal attack. Right, that's working. So let's put some context for people who don't know, who are not familiar with horizontal attacks. Horizontal attacks usually target regular implementation of asymmetric cryptographic algorithm. And it usually consists in mainly three steps. So the first one is after making measurement of the processing of RSA or DSi algorithm, we try to cut our patterns. That's also called verticalization. And so that's first step. The second step, the most crucial step that will define the success usually of our attack, is the point of interest selection phase. So we can't select our point of interest using usually use metrics such as t-test, any CV, or any other distinguisher like in profile attacks, since we are in an unsupervised context. So instead, we want to either apply some reduction dimension technique, such as the principal component analysis for pattern compression, as usually the pattern are long in length and not usable as they are. Or second method is the analysis of each sample point across all our pattern, and that's what we call univariate feature selection. So several contributions has been made for this second method, and after selecting our point of interest, we usually try to discriminate our patterns into or more classes, and this is usually done using some clustering algorithm or other distinguishers such as some correlation or other method. So that is for horizontal attacks. In this work, we aim at redefining a leakage model for this univariate point of interest analysis. Unlike the one that we didn't propose, we want to base this point of interest selection on some statistical testing and by analysis the Gaussian mixture of the observed point. And we also want to be able to characterize how exploitable our selected point of interest are and be able to rank them in the by exploitability before the attack. And last but not the least, we want a method that can be applicable to noisy dataset, noisy target, can be because of some countermeasure, outlier, or other stuff. So usually we can model secure implementation distribution of class or distribution of the bit of the exponent of the scalar as a Bernoulli process. This means that we can say that each bit or each class of each observed pattern can be seen as a Bernoulli trial with a repetition parameter pi0. In this context, we consider that we have two classes, for example, square multiply, or depends on the implementation you target. And so we would like to assess the point of interest and consider that if the repetition of our class follow a binomial distribution with the parameter we are looking for, assuming we know what is the targeted algorithm, repetition, weighted, we could possibly say this is a relevant point of interest that could carry some information about the leakage and about the manipulation of the data. Unfortunately, we don't have access to the value itself. We can only see the measurement result of this processing, and we can model each temporal point across all pattern as a Gaussian mixture with, in this case, two components. So that's just displayed here. So where each component would describe a behavior of a class, so which with its mean, its variance, and its repetition parameter inside the mixture. And so it means like if we can estimate properly the underlying component in our Gaussian mixture, we can then apply this binomial testing to assess if this repetition is relevant according to the weighted repetition of class, and again consider if this could be a relevant point of interest. However, usually traces that are acquired on modern products often display some additional behaviors that can come from different sources, some due to measurement setup, the presence of outlier or countermeasure. And this redefine the mixture that we are looking for. So if we only consider in this context that we have two classes to seek in our mixture, we will get bias in our estimation of parameter. And so instead, we have to consider as well this noisy component, as we can call them, are part of the process, and redefine our model as a mixture, as a sum of two components of noise and two components of information in blue. Because of that, it's mandatory to redefine our binomial test as a multinomial test. So that's a multinomial distribution with two major components that we are looking for. So these two major components in our case, where our binomial repetition parameter was 0.5, we want to find two major components which weight are reparted equally, and the sum of this weight should account for a defined threshold, in this case 0.9, where below this we consider that the repetition and the repetition of noisy component is too big to consider this point of interest exploitable. So we reiterate the statistical testing with a multinomial distribution. On top of that, to ensure that the estimated component and selected component of information are relevant and really describe a leakage, we consider that the Gaussian noise is expected to affect all components of information in a similar way. So if the two major components identified display a high variance disparity, we could conclude that they are not part of the same process. They are just a different behavior that have a repetition that we are looking for, but have different variance. So on top of that, we apply a Fisher variance test to ensure that our variance disparity is not too big, to consider this as a relevant point of interest. So this is a complete point of interest selection procedure. So for each temporal point across all patterns, we will then estimate the mixture parameters, theta, so that's pi, mu, and sigma. And then we will test the class repartition either by checking the, again, binomial test, binomial distribution or multinomial distribution, depending on the considered target and the variance disparity. And if both of these tests pass, we consider that this point of interest can be this temporal point can be in our set of point of interest at it is relevant against our requirement, and we can then calculate what we will call the probability of confusion. So now that we have point of interest, we want to evaluate how exploitable these point of interest are, or how exploitable the dominant mixture component can separate. This is relevant in the sense that it allows to evaluate, in the case of the clustering phase, how well these two classes that we consider will be well separated. And so we compute the area under the curve of the ownership probability of these two classes to get a metric between 0 and 1 that will describe how well these two Gaussian distribution are separated. And this will then allow to rank all point of interest by increasing exploitability. Finally, after that, after computing the probability of confusion for each selected point of interest, we observe that some identified point of interest share really high correlation with their neighboring point. But this neighboring point don't pass our statistical test or show probability of confusion way bigger. But we consider that if they share a high enough correlation, in this case we consider Spirian correlation, we can say that, so we choose a very high threshold for this correlation, we can say that they describe the same behavior, and they can be considered as in the same way as previously identified point of interest. And this is really interesting because it's allowed to widen our set of identified point of interest, and it will add some robustness during the attack phase. So we experimented and we validate our methodology on 3 different datasets, 3 different targets. 2 public targets are coming from previous contribution, and the last one is the RSA we made the acquisition by ourselves, and this is a sample pattern for each of the targeted algorithm. So here the result we obtain. On the upper line, you can see for ground truth, the supervised t-test. It's only used as comparison ground truth. We don't use this during the analysis, but it's only used as ground truth. And on the bottom line, you can see the result of our framework. So the area where you see peaks, so higher the better, show identified point of interest, and they are associated probability of confusion. So this is the result after the selection of point of interest plus the widening of the point of interest set using the correlation of Spearman. And we can see that we can find not all, as we have deficit of information compared to the t-test as it used known labels. But we can find, you see that we can successfully identify some of the leaking points that are present in this tree set. And we can see that the number of points of interest to be selected in the table below. And we can see that application of the Spearman correlation after the initial point of interest selection phase allow to add a non-negligible number of points of interest that have been excluded, but share a really high correlation with the selected point. So finally, let's carry out the attack. So we compare our approach to a supervised point of interest selection, so that is considered to be optimal. So we repeat for 100 times. We will select the most leaking point of interest. In our case, that will be the probability of confusion value with the lowest value. And to compare with the supervised point of interest selection, that will be the highest supervised t-test value. And in both approach, we will apply a fuzzy clustering algorithm on the M point of interest using a single trace. So to be clear, the analysis of point of interest can be carried out on one or multiple traces. So we don't have to limit to use the result of a single exponentiation or scalar multiplication. Even there is some blinding or countermeasure. But for the attack phase, we can apply the clustering only on a single trace. So here the result obtained. So on the top, this is a result of the clustering after the selection of the point of interest using supervised t-test. That should consider to be optimal. So that's our upper bound in this case. And on the bottom, we can see the result obtained by our method. So you can see different metric: minimum, the mean, the maximum, the quartile. And we can see that in all cases, we obtain at least on the 51st point an average of about 90% success rate. So we consider that this is satisfactory for the exponent or scalar recovery. In comparison, if we compare to Pevin 2014 point of interest selection method, it was on these two sets about 52%. And to go a bit more deeper, we applied we used our point of interest selection method and applied after that the method proposed, the framework proposed by Pevin in 2021 to ensure that it is still relevant by applying our own point of interest selection method. And we can see that on the 51st most relevant point of interest selected, we achieve about very close to 100% success rate on average. So we consider that the attack can be carried out either using either by applying clustering directly or using iterative framework to enhance a bit possibly the success rate. So to conclude, the proposed approach allow in the statistical approach to detect what we call noisy distributed leakage in the context of horizontal attacks. We widen our set of point of interest by considering a highly correlated neighbor. And we also characterize how exploitable our point of interest are before the attack by providing a ranking matrix. And we can see that with a deficit of information, the obtained results are not the same, obviously, with supervised approach, but compared to previous contribution, the gap between supervised and supervised attack is getting smaller. And I think that's it. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any question, I will be happy to answer them.
Questions? I have one question. So your practical experiments targets exponentiation with only 2 classes, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that your method will be as efficient against exponentiation with more classes, like against sliding window exponentiation with the size higher than 1?
Obviously, it will not be as efficient, and that's because, of course, the more classes you want to discriminate. Oh, not this one. Yeah, the more classes you want to discriminate, the harder it will be to discriminate. So it will be to estimate them in the Gaussian mixture. So, for example, if you have a sliding window exponentiation with, I don't know, 4, 8, or 16 class, it will be way harder, and also it will be harder to. It will be harder. Where is it? To compute efficient and relevant area coefficient between them, but still, it's theoretically possible to apply to more than 2 classes. Yeah, that's possible.
You don't see any limits with that. You don't think that with a higher than any number of places, this method is not efficient at all?
I think after a certain threshold, since we are assessing like a single univariate mixture, I think after a certain threshold, for example, if you want to apply this kind of method on a, I don't know, symmetric algorithm, I know AES, in a identity leakage model with 256 class, it's obvious that it could not be applied. But for example, if you consider Hamming weight leakage model, you can, I don't know, maybe consider that it could be possible, not efficiently. I don't know if maybe in this case it could be applied, but I think the main limit of this is that the univariate analysis. If we I think if we think of this in the multivariate way, I think we could expand to more dimension problem, to a higher number of classes.
So it looks like you combine many different univariate stuff, or like the dynamic distribution and the estimate tool is on the right, that you consider using like estimation of multivariate Gaussian mixture with expectation maximization or something like that. That also provides like the mode and the combine.
Yeah, we talked about that. For this paper, we only focused on univariate analysis, but we can, of course, easily expand this to, for example, like 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, or even more dimension for the mixture analysis. The only drawback of this is usually like analysis computation time, as it go a bit more in high dimension, but yeah, it could be applicable, I think. Yeah.
I have another question. So some point like you model the leakage as a diffusion mixer, and then when some of the modes you don't use them, do you need to set like a priori number of modes that you will not consider?
That's usually done by visual inspection. We saw that on one particular set, we always have a fixed number of components in our mixture, and so we define this beforehand by inspection. But you can possibly think to do this automatically and try to determine what number of modes best fit the mixture. That's possible too.
Can you go back to the 13 slide? I was wondering how many traces do you had to compute your t-test?
The t-test was computed on, I think that was about 300 traces, and each traces was about, it was 255 patterns.
It's quite high test value.
For
all of them,
it's quite high. Yeah, it's considered to be highly exploitable, I guess. But I can compare for an asymmetric in a symmetric context. Usually the leakage are way more higher. I don't know, but in this 3 case, these are exploitable. If we look at the t-test, it's like here.
Yeah. If we look at the third experiment, for instance, like the t-test value tells us that almost all the points, all the samples are interesting, right? But if we look at your results, you are selecting specific ones. Why not use them all if they are all useful?
I mean, I don't know. In the unsupervised analysis, I'm not aware of this upper t-test, but I think what it means is like even all points are showing some leakage in the upper graph. It means that only some of them show relevant leakage based on the hypothesis I made. So that means I want some points that are showing a binomial distribution, well-separated mode with low variance disparity, and that's the hypothesis I make beforehand, because I'm just thinking like based on our knowledge, an optimal leaking point should look like this, but that's not always the case. And if you look at the distribution of some high t-test value, we can see that some points are almost like Gaussian, but have high leakage score. So that's not always the case. That's just a guess, a hypothesis that we want to stick for our analysis.
Okay, let's thank to the speaker again. Okay, so the next talk is called the blind cell channel attack against AEAD with a belief propagation approach. The co-authors are Modou Sari, Aid Marouf, Hélène Leboudet, and Gaël Thomas. The speaker is Modou.
Hello everyone, my name is Modou Sari. I'm a PhD student at IMT Atlantic and the Desire. I am happy to take part in this conference and to present you my paper entitled Blunt Sustained Attack Against the AEAD with a Belief Propagation. My presentation is divided into 5 parts. In the first part, I talk about context and motivation. In the second part, I define a belief propagation. In the third part, I describe the blunt succinyl attack with a BP and on elephant. And on the fourth part, I explain the blunt succinyl attack with a BP on sparkle. And finally, conclusion. In the context and motivation. Today, there are several emerging domains, such as sensor network, the Internet of Things, the dispute control system, the cyber physical system, where highly contracted are interconnected, generally communicate wirelessly with each other and collaborate to accomplish a task. Furthermore, the majority of the current cryptography was designed for the device, for the desk server environment, and many of them are not well suited for the devices, limited by the processing power and the memory. How can we solve this problem? Basically, the solution is to create a new cryptography that fit into these devices. That is why NIST initiate a process in order to solicit, evaluate, and standardize a new cryptography algorithm that adapt on these small devices. All candidates are AEAD. What is AEAD? AEAD is an authenticated encryption with associated data. The AEAD take 4 input, a message, associated data, a secret key, and the norms, and produce a ciphertext and a tag. In this presentation, 2 finalists in the competition are Target, Elephant, and Sparkle. I define a blind stational attack. A blind stational attack is a new family of the stational attack, where no input, no output are used to recover a cryptographic key. All the traces and the knowledge of the algorithm is used. I define the Likert model. The power consumption or electromagnetic leakage are very correlated with the Hamming weight of the data. The Hamming weight is a classical model used in the domain of the stational attack. And the important advantage of the Hamming weight is that it rapidly reduces the gases. Our model is a noise wave with a noise Gaussian. In the second part, I define a belief propagation. A belief propagation algorithm is a bipartite graph, called factor graph or planar graph. Is variable node is associated with an information. In the planar graph, there are two types of variable. The variable node V and the factor node E. The variable node V representing the variable manipulated by the algorithm under attack, and the factor node representing the equation E between these variables. In this figure, the cycle are the variable node and the square are the factor node. A belief propagation take as input the planar graph and a priority of probability. In practice, the belief propagation exchange of information between variable and the factor graph. There are too many methods. The method between the factor graph to the variable node. This method is computed by the law of total probability. And the other method between the variable node to the factor node. This method is computed by the bias rule. After many iterations of the belief propagation output a post-priority probability. We present you in this part the blind sustained attack on elephant. Elephant is a AEAD algorithm. Was a finalist to the competition needs. Elephant use the cryptographic permutation masked with a linear feedback shift resistor. The permutation of elephant take input the secret key and return the mask. And this mask, you have the LFSR, the linear feedback shift resist. It is important to note that the mask value depend only on the secret key and no other input from elephant. That is why the goal is this attack is to find the initial asset of the LFSR, because it is the same to recover the secret key. The attacker exploits two vectors. The first is a vertical evolution of the mask by the LFSR iteration, and the other is the horizontal evolution of the mask by the domain of separation. And in this attack, the liquid model is a noise harmonic wave. And for the all byte of the LFSR. The tunnel graph of elephant. In the tunnel graph of elephant, you have many variables. You have variable node in the color move by the byte of the LFSR, and you have two-factor node. You have the retroaction equation by the LFSR, and you have the equation linking the mask and color yellow. The result of this attack with a Bloc propagation take the tunnel graph of elephant and the priority probability. After many iterations, exactly 20 iterations, this table presents the rank of the all k-byte on the 1000 randomly generated k and for the different noise. The rank of byte vary between 0 and 255. For example, in the column mean, if the noise is not the mean, the rank of the byte is generally 3. If the noise is not high. I present you a branch session attack with a sparkle. Oswald is a finalist to the NIST level cryptography. It is an AEAD. It is constructed by the duplex construction which use the variant beetle. In this figure, the sparkle take input the secret key and the nonce. The goal is to recover the key. Zoom on the sparkle. The key is divided on two words of 64 bit, ZK and Z5, noted in K1 and K2. The goal is to recover the input of the AZ and the input of the AZ A5. Because the master key is divided by the K1 and the K2. That is why you zoom on the AZ. On AZ is a 4-round RX box. It operates with a mini operation, the modular operation, the XOR, and the rotation. And you have four rounds. The LZ take 2 words of 3 to 2 bit, and the goal is to find the input of the AZ. And the goal is to find the input with a blend stational attack. And we have chosen 3 points. The point after the modular modular operation, and the point after the XOR, and the point after the XOR. And in this attack, the liquid is modeled by the noisy Hamming wave. The tenor graph of the sparkle are defined by a level bit, and there are many different nodes. You have the node L and L, and C is a 3-1 bit, and the 3-1 bit variable K, because the modular operations are involved. And in this graph, you have two types of equation. The first equation is a bitwise translation of the equation, which describe the LZ, and the other equation is the Hamming rate. It is the sum of the band. After this, the blue propagation take the tenor graph of the sparkle and the probability, and after several iterations of the blue propagation, this table presents the number of the recovery bit of the 64 K1 input of the AZ A4 with 1,000 different. In this table, at the column mean, the attacker recover 67 bits out of the 664. If the noise does not exceed the 0.5. It is the first alert. In the second alert, the attacker takes the same tenor graph and the input of the probability probability of the many iteration. You have the similar result of the before result. The attacker recover 56 bits out of the 64 bit. At the conclusion, you have success to realize two attacks. The first attack, it is a direct attack on elephant with a noisy Hamming wave model, and the second attack is a blood stational attack on the sparkle with a noisy Hamming wave model. And the power of the belief propagation was also argued in our research. In the future, a practical implementation of this attack elephant and a sparkle, and we target ASCOM to explore its security because it is the winner of the competition. Thank you for your attention.
and for some questions.
Thank you for the presentation. To my understanding, the attack is unprofiled, right? Is that the case? There is no profiling phase.
Repeat again.
To my understanding, this attack, this blind attack is unprofiled. Doesn't need to profile,
No.
no. Then, what exactly do we need to know about the Hamming weights? How can, in practice, the practical experiment, how can we tell apart the Hamming weights?
Okay.
And then proceed. Could you elaborate?
In the liquid model, the power consumption and the power consumption of the electromagnetic liquids are very correlated to the Hamming weight of the dilithium. Okay, it is a classical model used of the domain stational analysis. And this for example, in the graph of a sparkle, I use the Hamming waves as an equation, because it induce a new relation with other not variable.
But how do you know how the leakage maps to Hamming weight observable? How the Hamming weight value maps to leakage observable?
Is a Hamming weight?
Normally I would do that with profiling or something.
Because before the Turner graph, I compute the probability from the Hamming weight of all the bytes of the LFSR. Yes.
Thank you.
Another quick question? Well, I have one more. Do you plan to attack Ascon, or did you already attack Ascon? Do you talk in conclusion that you
no my future work?
Yes, but I was wondering if you already attacked Ascon, or if you plan to
plan.
You are planning to do it. Okay. Okay, so let's thank the speaker again.